Good morning and welcome to the Crime and Disorder Committee Overview and Scrutiny Panel. First, some housekeeping. Fire alarm. The fire practice is not expected. If the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. If there is anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs, where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and the use of the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for your assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Mobile phones. I'd like to ask everybody to ensure that your mobile phone and laptops are switched to silent. I do apologise, I have to keep mine on for a sugar alarm, but it won't affect anything if it goes off. Filming of the meeting. This meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask all those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio can be captured? Any members of the public entering the council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the council, but there aren't any. There are no public in attendance. So very quickly, some of us know each other, but people watching on the screen won't know any of us. If I could just ask for a very quick introduction, just a one-liner, who you are and what you intend to get out of today. If I could start with over here, please.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Hardy. I am the Head of Service for Safer Communities for the City of Doncaster Council.
Thank you.
Morning, I'm Pete Thorpe. I'm the District Commander for Doncaster and the Chair of the Safer Stronger Doncaster Partnership.
Hello, I'm Glyn Whiting. I'm Councillor for Thornham Morans wards.
Councillor Ioan Emmanuel Crachun for Balby South.
Morning, Councillor Russ Lindley for Hexthorpe and Balby North.
Hello, I'm Nick Allen. I'm one of the councillors for Bessaker Ward.
Good morning. My name's Councillor Lee Sammed. I'm the councillor for Rosington and Bowtree.
Councillor Gemma Cobby for Town Ward.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Wright, Governance Officer.
Chair John Reid, Councillor for Mexborough. Okay, I'll start the agenda. Apologies for absence. Officially should be notified by Rachel, but I'll just add Alexander Jones is the only apology. To consider the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting. None present. Declarations of interest, already been asked, but does anybody today have a declaration of interest that they wish to declare now?
Yes, please, John. I'm involved with the community group for violence against women and girls, and I know it's being brought up today.
Thank you. Minutes of the Crime and Disorder Committee at the last meeting, proposed by me, seconded by Councillor Nick. No public statements, nobody's in attendance, so we'll simply move over. We're now going to do the Crime and Community Safety Update. We're going to ask Rachel. She's going to go through a presentation. It's split nicely into 6 areas, but what we're going to do, we're going to cover them all together, and then we've got questions and answers after that, which we'll go through from start to finish, but we'll try and keep them into the same 6 sections as Rachel is going to keep things to now. So, over to you, Rachel.
Chair, you've actually got myself and Jackie going to walk through the presentation. So you've got me for the first half.
Okay.
And you've got Jackie for the second half. So, morning everyone. We'll just move on. So we're going to cover a number of topics with you today. We're going to give the overview of some crime and antisocial behaviour data and some of the key findings within that. And some headlines that line up to the priorities of the Safer, Stronger Doncaster Partnership, namely reducing antisocial behaviour, reducing substance and alcohol misuse, reducing crime and reoffending, tackling serious and organised crime, reducing violence and violent crime, and tackling domestic and sexual abuse. We're also going to talk to you a little bit about some of the communications activity that we do as a group, and then there's essentially a summary of the key findings and some proposed next steps. Thanks, Rachel. So as an overarching key headings, we've seen an overall decrease in reported crime during the period of around 6.5%, which is not dissimilar to the overall falls that we're seeing across South Yorkshire of just under 7.36%. What we did see, though, however, was an increase in the reporting of antisocial behaviour, which increased by 8%, which sits slightly above the overall increases seen across South Yorkshire of 6%. So just for clarity, this data refers to the year of 2025 compared to the calendar year of 2024. What we have seen is relatively stable volumes of domestic abuse offending, and again, that's in line with what we see across the rest of South Yorkshire. We saw an increase of around 6% in the reporting of sexual offences across the force, and again, that's not dissimilar in Doncaster with an increase of around 4%. And overall, most serious violence offences reduced by 15%. At force-wide, there was a slightly smaller decrease in Doncaster of 7% in the same reporting period, and the number of offences clearly then falling by 7 offences. And I will talk to you a little bit more about that data as we move through the presentation. So just looking at a little bit more depth at some of the key data for all crime, you can see there, January to December 24, Doncaster recorded 38,337 crimes. In the year 2025, that fell to 35,894, which is a reduction of 6.4%. And then you can see the comparator underneath for the whole force, which is 148,000, reducing to 137,000. In terms of the proportion of crime that occurs in Doncaster in relation to the rest of South Yorkshire, Doncaster accounts for around 26% of all recorded crime. Sheffield is the highest area of recorded crime in South Yorkshire with just under 40%. And as you can see there, there's a breakdown month by month. Essentially, we record somewhere in the region of 2,500 to 3,000 crimes a month. And that fluctuates for a number of reasons as we move through seasonality, etc., which will become more apparent in some of the later slides. Thank you, Rachel. So just looking through some actual offending types. So we categorise crime by Home Office approved groups, which are on the column on the left. And you can see a number of offences as we move down have seen some significant reductions. So arson and criminal damage offences have fallen, as has burglary. Miscellaneous crimes against society, which is a bit of a mop-up of random bits of offences that don't sit under obvious offending types. Possession of weapons, public order offences, sexual offences, theft, vehicle offences have remained static, and we've seen a reduction in violence overall as well. The two areas that have grown relate to drug offences, and that's seen a 26% increase on 2025 compared to 24, and a 15% increase in relation to robbery. I think with any stats, there's good reasons why some numbers might go up and some good reasons why they might go down, and vice versa. The drug activity in part will be driven by an increase in our operational response to some drug activity. So, for example, we execute a cannabis warrant once every 2 days in Doncaster and the wider borough. That's part of our proactive response to trying to tackle the drug problem. So some of that will contribute to some of those rises, but again, that's a similar pattern seen wider in South Yorkshire as well. And the change in robbery offending, there was a change in legislation around certain types of robbery that occurred in 2025. So some robberies that occurred in a shop environment, for example, changed the recording of that, which has led to some of that increase. So the number of robberies probably hasn't changed significantly, but the way it's recorded has led to what looks like quite a significant increase. Thanks, Rachel. So just trying to show you a little bit of a flavour of where we've been in the last few years. So again, this is just crime we're talking about here, and you can see the various coloured charts from 2020 across to 2025. And what you can see there is in 2025, with the 35,000 offences we recorded, that was lower than the previous 3 years, with an overall volume comparable to that of 2020. So we are comparable levels to where we were in the sort of peak COVID period or just before. Month by month offending, similar trend to other years. But you can see year on year, 23 we saw a reduction of just under 2%. 2024 was a reduction of 8.3%, and obviously 25 a reduction of 6.37%. So there's a continued pattern of reductions since we've come away from COVID. Just to dig into a little bit more of the data now, so looking at most serious violence offences, so these deal with certain offence types such as murder, attempted murder, death or severe injury by dangerous driving, and assault with intent to cause serious harm. So this is the most serious level of violence that is decreed under the law. You can see there this year there has been a slight slowdown in the reductions, but that is on the back of very strong reductions on previous years. So we saw strong reductions in 23 and 24, and a much smaller reduction in 25. Again, that puts us, the reductions seen this year have been slightly smaller in Doncaster than I've seen in other areas, but we've seen the stronger gains in earlier years, in 23 to 25. So it's not unexpected that it would be a real challenge to sustain a 25% reduction in most serious violence year on year. But what we can say is in the 3 years, there's been a 29% reduction, which is still strong reductions in those offence types. Thank you, Rachel. Just to highlight some of the work of the theme group then that supports that within the structures of the SSDP. So as you can see, there's what we call a public health approach to reducing violence. This is something that is commonly used across the country. The Violence Reduction Unit, which is funded through SIMCA, supports local groups to provide positive activities for young people. And we have piloted the Youth Futures panel, which I know we're going to talk about, and there's a question about that as we move through later on as well, so we can cover that at that point. One of the other key focuses is around making the nighttime economy safer. So currently we have 20 plus venues that have joined the Best Bar None scheme, aiming to improve safety and standard, with plans to expand that further as we move into our new cycle and new strategy period. There's continued support for safe haven spaces, taxi marshals and hotspot response hubs to reduce harm during the nights out. And we have Operation Street Safe, which uses intelligence-led early interventions to reduce serious harm in the city centre. Another focus of the group is around reducing knife crime. So in the previous periods, we've worked with over 700 students, took part in an educational programme such as Make Your Mark, Guns and Knives Take Lives, and One Punch Can Kill. We have the Safer Knife Replacement Scheme promoted around round tip knives in homes, colleges and community settings. The knife amnesty bins provide safe disposal points across Doncaster. Schools gained access to trauma-informed knife crime education developed from Learn Sheffield and the Youth Endowment Fund. The EPIC Hub strengthened reinforcement and engagement, helping reduce knife-related offences and youth weapon possession. There was proactive targeted of habitual knife crime carries through early intervention and arrest. That's something we track on a monthly basis. And ongoing participation in Operation Sceptre, which is a national operation that looks at the activity targeted solely around knife crime in itself. We've also worked within the space of protecting women and girls within this subgroup. They've created safe spaces in licensed venues and distributed safety packs and equipment to increase confidence when people are on a night out, and delivered awareness sessions in schools and community events to improve understanding and access to support that's available. And then the future work is looking around the Businesses Against Abuse scheme, which I know there's a question. We'll no doubt cover that in some detail at the end. Essentially looking to help organisations prevent sexual harassment and predatory behaviour, and working towards Purple Flag status, which is an expansion of the Best Bar None scheme. Thank you, Rachel. Just digging into a little bit of this serious acquisitive crime. So broadly, this covers offence groups of burglary, theft from the person, robbery offences, and vehicle-related theft and or taking interference with vehicles. And again, I'll draw your attention to the bottom right. In the last 3 years, we've seen reductions overall with these offence types, 10% in 23, just under 4% in 24, and just under 6% in 25. So we're seeing relatively low levels, the lowest levels actually since that we've had in this space, since slightly higher than last year, but overall, when we look in the early years, 2021, 20, some significant reductions. What's driving some of the challenge here is particularly dominated by vehicle-related offences, where we've had most successes around residential burglary, which I think is on the next slide. So for a number of years now, Doncaster had the unenviable title of being one of the worst places to suffer residential burglary in the country. A couple of years ago, we started an initiative called Operation Castle, which is a dedicated response to looking at residential burglary. That started in 2023. There was a change in legislation at that point as well in terms of how home burglary is recorded, and that's why the data is not available for previous years in the way that it's formatted in this data set. But you can see there we've had strong reductions year on year since we started our Operation Castle initiative. There was been a 22% reduction in residential burglaries in 2023, at 14% in 2024, and in 2025 a further 26% reduction in residential burglaries. So where in 2022 we suffered 2,323 burglaries of people's homes, last year that was reduced to 1,137. So some significant reductions year on year in that space, and we're currently experiencing the lowest levels I think we've ever had around residential burglary in Doncaster. So that is one of our standout achievements, I would suggest. Thank you, Rachel. In terms of the problem to start with, it's partly to do with our approach. We've ran some dedicated problem-solving elements, which has been called Operation Hawkeye, which is seen as how we deal with the initial response to burglary. We put some dedicated resource into a dedicated team to look at the problem. So resourcing, the volume of resourcing hasn't changed in the district. It's just how we've used the resources to focus on that problem a little bit further, and looking at how we make changes to the way that we investigate the offences, how we deal with the suspects that are related and the intelligence that sits around them, and act on that in a slightly different way. But also the problem-solving work that we've done, where we've used something called DAX media. So if you live in a particular hotspot and you have smart speakers in your house, for example, it will tell you that you live in a difficult area of burglary and give you advice, as well as some of the cocooning activity and the other wider problem-solving activity we do. So where we ran Hawkeye in several ward areas last year, we saw a reduction of over 50% in those areas. So it's been a combined effort, really, in that sense. Just moving on then to the integrated offender management. So this is how we monitor. We manage cohorts of offenders in 3 cohorts called the fixed, flex, and free cohort. Essentially, the fixed cohort deals with our most problematic and high-risk reoffenders. The flex cohort, we have a degree of autonomy in terms of who sits in that, as low as the free. Essentially, there's 74 of these offenders being managed through this process at the moment. What we have seen is an increase in the reoffending rate in our flex cohort, but reductions in our other cohorts. The way this works is there's something called the Offender Group Reconviction Scale. It's essentially a way of calculating risk to people's reoffending rates. So within the flex cohort, people who perpetrate shoplifting, for example, have an OGRS score of over 85%, which indicates that there is a significant risk of them reoffending. The other offenders that are held in the flex cohort are around neighbourhood crimes, so some of those burglars that we've just talked about and people that are nicking cars, etc. And again, their OGRS score is above 60%, so that's some of the most challenging groups of offenders. So it's not unsurprising to us, I would suggest, that we've seen some reoffending within that cohort. Thank you, Rachel. So just to look in a little bit more detail at some of the work of that theme group, the group has had a refresh and includes additional key partners from across Doncaster. That's primarily focused on reducing the reoffending of individuals under the probation supervision, specifically those that are released from prison on licence. We've put in place a local plan that aligns with the government's national crime strategy, ensuring that our work in Doncaster contributes to wider efforts to reduce crime, support rehabilitation and strengthen public safety. We've worked closely with partners across Doncaster to help people leaving the criminal justice system build a stronger, more stable future by improving access to employment, training, education, health services and restorative justice opportunities. We're creating clearer pathways away from reoffending and towards positively fulfilling lives. This work is supported by strengthened multi-agency collaboration, improved data sharing to tackle organised crime and repeat offending more effectively. We've also taken targeted action to reduce serious acquisitive crime, as I've just described in relation to burglary as an example. In addition, the strengthened multi-agency collaboration has helped plan the release of cohorts of individuals following recall across several tranches into Doncaster, and that includes the adoption of an arrivals lounge for when people leave prison, which has been utilised to develop further day space hub provision for those offenders that are leaving prison and re-entering the community. Doncaster adheres to the National Integrated Offender Management Strategy, and as I've just explained on that previous slide, we manage our cohort through three different cohorts. The focus around that work is having essentially appointments with officers and probation staff on a regular basis. We've improved those appointments to our IOM nominals by giving them 3 appointments a week and commission providers to ensure that we're providing an enhanced offer, and the target offer being 12 appointments per case per month. In December, we averaged around 14.3 appointments per month with that cohort of offenders, so consistently managing above that target. So albeit we've seen some increase in our flex cohort, the fact that we've got a more robust appointment system and contact with the offenders and getting the right support around them to prevent their reoffending is why we're seeing those falls in the other 2 cohorts. Doncaster and we have dedicated police officer and a dedicated youth offender worker, which are seconded with the probation service, which support the work. And one particular focus this year has been building on a multi-agency panel to increase information sharing and joint care leavers being released from prison. Thank you, Rachel. I'm now going to very briefly talk to you about the serious organised crime slide. There isn't a data slide that goes with this set, and we can discuss at the end what you'd like to see perhaps in future presentations from us. But essentially, this is a particularly sensitive area for us in terms of not just policing, but in the wider partnership. But we tend to pursue our organised networks on 4 key principles of pursue, prevent, protect and prepare. There are currently 10 mapped organised crime groups within Doncaster. We manage those through our dedicated function, which is called a Fortify team. That's supported by local neighbourhood policing teams and by partners as well. We have a tactical bronze meeting takes place, which is a multi-agency meeting. Within that meeting, we share tactical initiatives and develop intelligence to try and ensure that we can target those that are causing the most harm most effectively and ensure that we maximise disruption against those groups. So essentially, it's a very tactical-based coordination of partners in terms of our effort, making sure we understand our intelligence and that we've got some robust plans to interact and disrupt these people committing these crimes. In 2025, we executed 139 warrants that were linked to organised crime and then recorded 156 what we call disruptions, in addition to numerous partnership interventions. And actually what you find is we do more disruptions and more activity against our OCG cohorts than are seen across the other districts within South Yorkshire. The OCG problem does bring us some challenge around firearms, but what we have been seeing is a decrease in the use of those firearms discharges and use of firearms within the organised criminal fraternity in recent years, and that continues to move in the right direction. And in terms of resources and awareness raising, continues to be focused on preventing the exploitation of children and young people, and I know there's a question about that as well, which I can pick up at the end too. I'm going to give my voice a rest now and hand over to Jackie, who's going to talk to you through some of the further slides.
Yeah, good morning. So if I start with antisocial behaviour, so from the statistics on the screen, we can see that Doncaster saw an increase of 8%, which is comparable with the force increase of 6%. In terms of seasonal, the summer months always present challenges around antisocial behaviour, and 2025, with its prolonged summer, obviously contributed to that increased challenge and increased in volumes. Overall, what we did see is that the town ward recorded the highest volumes of 15%, and this was an increase year in year of 18%. The greatest increases in the town ward were related to rowdying and inconsiderate behaviour, begging, vagrancy, the normal sort of offence types that we'd expect. Please don't be alarmed by that, because we spent probably 2 years really trying to address the lack of confidence in reporting around antisocial behaviour. And I know some councillors in the room have really championed that with us. I see those increases as a real positive, because the public need to have confidence in the mechanisms for reporting and then the response that they get from it, and be under no illusions there's more work to do. But antisocial behaviour is not to be underestimated in terms of the impact it has on communities and their lives. So this has had some significant attention as we try to understand what is happening, where is it happening, then we can direct resources to target it as early as possible and prevent it occurring in the first place. Next slide, please. Just in terms of antisocial behaviour then, the main categories we saw the increases in were off-road bikes, that was a 23% increase, abandoned vehicles 24%, begging and vagrancy 32%. We have some real positives in terms of sex work related antisocial behaviours come down by 61%, some animal-based antisocial behaviour, a reduction of 31%, and then litter, drugs, paraphernalia down by 15%. Overall off-road bikes again saw an increase across the force, and I think, you know, one of the contributing factors to that is their popularity in society as new machineries come on board, particularly around young people wanting it, and obviously it's being used in so many different forms as an alternative method of transport. So again, not surprising rises, but we've got to keep up with the tech, we've got to keep up with the legislative change, and we've got to keep up with the challenges and the changing landscape of how we try to address it. Sorry, say that again? In certain circumstances, yes, and obviously no. There's real difficulty with the legislation. The current legislation is not fit for purpose. It's not kept up with the tech and the use by people. So that limits our response to it. And we have got very, very narrow powers to be able to deal with it, both civilly and criminally. And that is being looked at, because obviously we've raised it through different forums to get the political buy-in to strengthen the legislation to be able to respond. So it is a real challenge for us. It doesn't mean we're not dealing with it, but the laws of the land give us a framework to work within. The problem is it's a weak framework and it needs strengthening considerably because of the changes in the machinery, the use, their power, capability. And of course, it's an alternative method that people have found cheaper to your traditional transport, aren't they? You know, the way it's took off with your Deliveroo, the way it's being used by young people, the way that people are using e-bikes, you know, to get to and from and do things. You see them everywhere doing everything. And of course, naturally, there are some people that behaviour is unacceptable and it is antisocial. If I give you an example, yesterday I was walking through town, coming back from a meeting with the Frenchgate Centre, and a balaclavaed male, no helmet, came through from the Cleveland Street junction at probably, I would estimate, about 50, 60 mile an hour against the one-way flow of traffic, screaming on an off-road bike. And of course, immediately you stand still and think, what are we doing here? It's completely unacceptable behaviour. And no, and that's where your offences come in, because you're on a public road, a public highway, you no driving licence, no insurance, failing to wear a crash helmet, all those things. Yeah, on a road, yeah. Yeah, part of the carriageway. So there are driving offences as well as then other offences of due care and attention, etc., etc. So this is a challenging area, and it's not just in Doncaster in the county. This is a national challenge which is being looked at by the Police Chiefs Council. It's being looked at legislatively, and it needs to change. So please, you know, we need your support around some of this in due course, around that, the political might and will to influence that change at a national level. The difficulty comes in these scenarios if you've got somebody, and I know we're going a little bit off piece, but some of the main challenges around the pursuit of this is if we ask police colleagues to pursue somebody without a crash helmet who then comes off and dies, you're into real difficult arenas. Oh yeah, they do. Yeah. So we have got off-road bike capabilities within South Yorkshire Police, and they do a sterling job. It's a small team, and you can imagine the demand challenges that the county face. We are up there as a high demand county, and there's only a small amount of resources to deal with large demand and high profile, high harm crime. So yeah, it presents challenges, but we've got to persevere, and the reporting, to take it full circle, it's critical we get that right. The more intelligence, the more information, the toolbox that we've got to try and deal with it, but we need public support, we need your support, report. That gives us a richer picture, and then we can start looking at all the different pieces of intelligence to match it, to then identify, because of course the balaclavas cause us a problem. We can't force them to remove balaclavas. Again, every time we're working with our hands tied behind our back, so please, please encourage the community. I don't care if it raises the figures, it's about the information it gives us to be able to piece that together as a jigsaw piece, to do something about it, to identify, to locate, to seize where appropriate, and to prosecute where appropriate. Yeah, but they're not all the same. That's the fundamental. They're all different powers, they're all different capabilities.
Excuse me, could I just reiterate the questions are kept to the end?
Yeah.
To keep the flow going, and we'll stay as long as we need to get them all in. But if they could remain till the end,
no
I'd
problem.
be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on then, just in relation to antisocial behaviour, the graph itself shows the changes. Again, what you will see is the summer rises. Again, they are traditionally across year upon year. As the warmer weather, naturally, people's behaviour changes, whether that's noise, parties, drinking, being out in public spaces, and that's where we change our approach in terms of planned activity around that visible response, the prevention activity, the intervention, etc. Some of the key work of the theme group involves a range of different things. If you just bear with me, there's a lot on this slide. We've done quite a lot of work with our youth groups around developing educational videos. There is one for younger young people around off-road bikes. We've also done one for what we would call light and dark nights. So light nights linked to some of the summer work around how we reduce antisocial behaviour across the summer. Dark nights, traditionally for us, it's called Operation Anticipate, and that involves the bonfire night period where you get spikes in antisocial behaviour used to youth nuisance, your egging of your windows, your fireworks, etc. So there's 3 videos that have been really positively received, developed with young people, and there's a further one now being commissioned around older young people to do with the off-road bikes in response to that rise. We have a dedicated partnership tasking group that's been established to address the off-road bike challenges and really explore a whole range of different opportunities to intervene, educate, and obviously enforce where appropriate to do so. That includes some of the target hardening of fuel sales through the garage watch scheme. We need garages to be responsible to challenge people who are filling up your jerry cans and those types of things, or the bikes themselves, not just your e-bike scenario. Obviously, there is some national work going on with manufacturers as well around the responsible selling. We've also done additional patrols, which we've had various bits of funding through, but if I give you the example that across the summer there was in excess of 11,000 hours of additional patrols, and that's jointly with our South Yorkshire Police colleagues. South Yorkshire Police are innovatively also using something called VisiBeat, which allows us to demonstrate where the staff have been, which communities, for how long, which routes, and obviously that we can evidence that visible presence. The council are currently looking at that, and I've got a paper going through the Tactical Governance Board to see if we can be the first council in the country to adopt that, to also demonstrate to communities that visible presence in real time across all 88 communities. We've had some additional funding that's been provided as well. We have got e-bikes for ourselves, but obviously we will use them responsibly. Our police colleagues are currently using them. And again, it's just a bit different method of how we can get into the communities and across communities into some of the key hotspots and be visible. In addition, our communities colleagues who sit in the Chief Exec's Directorate, they work collaboratively with us, not just community safety, and they've put on the community-led support sessions, again with public health across all of the communities in Doncaster. We're working with our primary schools around the junior citizenship programme, and our fire service colleagues are also running the resilience programme for young people. You'll be aware that we do have one of the tools that we do use is the public space protection orders, and I'll answer the question at the end just what that is, but we have one for the city centre, we have one for Hexthorpe, we have one for Alligates, and we all have one for Dogfowling, so there's 4 in place across Doncaster. In relation to some of the antisocial behaviour linked to fly tipping, over the last 3 years we've had 6,143 investigations, which is fairly significant. That's produced a lot of positive results, and obviously we continue to focus on that work because it is a bit of a blight on our communities and the issues that it creates. We've also done quite a significant amount of work with trading standards to address some of the illegal sales, counterfeit goods, and again, where it's linked to antisocial behaviour, it's around your nitrous oxide canisters, and of course the discarded vapes, because they're an environmental hazard as well. And that continues to be a key focus for us moving forward. You'll be aware, particularly for the city centre, but obviously often in some of our community settings, along some of our shop fronts in communities, we have encountered people who appear to present as rough sleeping and or homeless. So we continue to work with our starting point service, Changing Lives, and our commissioning teams around trying to identify these people, engage and obviously trying to signpost to support wherever possible, and where behaviours do become antisocial or criminal, then we do try to deal with them compassionately, but we do have to take a stance in terms of dealing with behaviours. In terms of the EPIC Hub, I'll answer the question at the end regarding EPIC, but we do have additional resources around engagement with young people and diversionary activities in Bowlby, Wheatley and the city centre within the French Gate Hub. And there's obviously a new youth hub coming into play at Wheatley imminently. So just moving on in terms of the substance misuse theme group. The graphs are what they are, and I am not an expert on these particular graphs and the detail. If you've got any specific questions about that data set, please let me know and I will give you a detailed breakdown of it. But it basically shows you the different types of substance, your opiates, your cracks, your cannabis, cocaine, amphet, hallucinogenics, alcohol, etc. There's a wide variety of drugs in society, both prescription and illegal, that are being used by society at large. And obviously the treatment services and the exits from treatments are displayed on the lower graph in terms of those that are coming in and out of treatment. Some more specifics around the work being done in this theme groups, which is led by our public health service, is around our collaboration between the EPIC Youth Service and Zone 5 to 19 to target interventions and obviously de-escalate substance misuse with our young people. We've got sustained capacity, increased criminal justice treatment options, which is linked to the Combating Drugs Partnership and the National Drug Strategy. And that's about services targeting those where substance misuse is associated with offending, because we know what's one of the drivers around criminal behaviours. We've also established alcohol early interventions, targeting high-risk drinkers in liaison with primary care, and they're situated, some of those hubs, in different parts of Doncaster to make sure services are in communities and accessible by communities. We're continuing the care between the prisons and the community treatment services, and Pete touched on this, is that package of support as people are exiting through the departure lounge and the community hub, to ensure that we don't just consider accommodation, but it's all those vital building blocks that people need in life around bank accounts, around employment, training, obviously support to keep them out of substance misuse, whether it be alcohol or drugs, and what that then leads to. Naloxone, which is an intervention that's administered when somebody potentially is overdosing, that's now carried by South Yorkshire Police. It's also carried by a number of support services in the community, and it is administered where required as part of a life-saving treatment before emergency services get to them. And we've also got drug and alcohol teams established under the hospital as part of that treatment response, both from an early intervention and then more of a where people are in the crisis state. Moving on then to the domestic abuse. Again, the slide is quite data heavy in terms of the offence types linked to domestic abuse, whether that be arson, criminal damage, burglary, drugs, etc. They're associating criminal types that link to the domestic abuse world. In addition, it shows the domestic abuse investigation count, and again, the number of investigations, we can see that steady rise. There's been a significant amount of work nationally, regionally, locally to increase reporting, to make sure survivors and those who haven't come forward yet are encouraged to report, to try to reduce domestic abuse and the levels of it across society. In terms of statistically, relatively stable volumes at a force-wide level across the county. We've seen a 0.43% increase at South Yorkshire level, and that's replicated at Doncaster at 0.6% increase. But again, the emphasis on reporting is fairly significant here, is that, you know, you can see on a global setting the impact of abuse, some of the high-profile cases which are going on that we can see. But then locally, you know, we are trying to replicate that encouragement to victims to report so that they can get the right support and that we can stop it wherever possible. In terms of offending volumes across 24 and 25, we saw increases in early spring and at the start of winter. The town ward recorded the highest volumes of 11%, with an increase of 5% when compared to the previous year. Violence against women and girls, so the greatest volumes across the previous years, and the offence group has the largest volume change of plus 91% and 2% respectively. 91 offences, sorry, and 2% overall. Again, violence on women and girls is a big topic. It has been heavily promoted. It is an area that's expanding at a rapid rate. And of course, we've got a new strategy that's just been launched by the government. We will be holding a Violence Against Women and Girls workshop to really stand still, review, reflect on where we've come around this piece of work, what we've done to date, what difference has it made, how does that align to the new strategy, and then we'll reset our local delivery plans in the next few months alongside the launch of the new community safety strategy. By exception then, we've also seen some decreases in this world, particularly around offence types linked to domestic abuse, around arson and criminal damage. We saw a decrease of 32 offences, which is roughly 7%, which is always positive to see. So moving forward with a little bit more data around the VOG agenda, as it's respectfully known, for violence against women and girls. Stable for 24 and 25, slight increases of plus 1%, and Doncaster saw a decrease of 4%. Small minor monthly fluctuations, but nothing by exception to report on. Lowest volume of those was seen in February of 25 with 403 reports. Peaks occurred in April and July, but there's no seasonal trend identified to give you any further information around that. Decrease of 6% compared year on year, and then the violence against the person saw a decrease of 5% in 2025. But again, it's relatively stable in terms of that data set. Sexual offences, we saw a 6% increase force-wide. We saw a slight increase of 4% locally. Again, that constant message about reporting is present in this one, as we'd expect. a few different fluctuations through different months, but nothing by exception to sort of bring to the table in terms of explanation. And there was a decrease of 6%, 13 reports when compared to the previous year. Again, we saw the town ward as the highest volumes. And of course, we have to play the nighttime economy into some of this, which obviously heavily features because it's the city centre. On the line graph, sexual offences, including domestic abuse in Doncaster, has shown an increase over the last 2 years. So just some more specifics. There's so much to report on this one. Data-wise around non-domestic offences, non-domestic offences, which are domestic abuse removed, there was an increase of 5%. That's relative to the force-wide, and then we saw a decrease of 14% when compared to the previous year of the other sexual offences groups. What we are conscious about in this particular group is that this is a lot of data, and we talk about domestic offences, non-domestic offences. If this doesn't make any sense to you, if you can let us know, we'll try to make this more of a common language moving forward. But this is a very complicated area of work with lots of different offence types to consider into it. So if you want this in a different way moving forward, please let us know. But this is very data heavy in this section. Just some of the key points about the theme groups work. We've more than doubled the amount of safe accommodation for victims fleeing domestic abuse. The new Red Flags film has been produced by Doncaster Youth Council to raise awareness among young people about unhealthy relationships, and that's part of our prevention approach. The short film produced, there's also been a short film produced with our local survivors of domestic abuse, focusing on that coercive and controlling behaviour. The Safe at Home scheme has been introduced to help victims of domestic abuse remain safe in their home where they choose to remain within the property. It's improving that security within the property. 2 specialist domestic abuse workers have been employed within DBTH to train staff and ensure victims of abuse who enter the hospital are supported. That's often a safe space, and that's often where people feel safe to talk. And we wanted to encourage that where we can identify those early signs, those early conversations, that people are supported through an alternative route to traditional reporting methods. And we've also produced an easy guide for professionals which explains what domestic abuse is, how to get help to keep people safe, and obviously to, especially for those with a learning disability who might find it more difficult from the traditional reporting channels. And I suppose what we're trying to do is make this particular work and the work of violence against women and girls everybody's business, because if you see the signs, it can be at any point. It could be a friend you're talking to, it could be a family member, it could be a work colleague. We could see it in the street. Don't ignore it, you know, do the humanitarian thing, ask the right questions, and the more people that get a better understanding of what domestic abuse is, what violence against women and girls is, the more support we can provide and the more harm we can prevent. If I move on to some of the communications activity, I have to say, as part of the Safer Doncaster Partnership, in response to the Community Safety Strategy Survey, we took a long and hard look at communication and felt that we needed to strengthen it quite significantly. And I think it's fair to say that we've moved a long way in a short period of time. I think from a public perspective, they want more information about what happens when they report, what action is taken, and what difference it then makes. We also need to recognise that across these big themes, there is a lot of activity, and we need to be smarter about how we communicate and how we get the public involved in that communication. Some of the work that we've tried to do is majorly around the Report It to Sort It campaign across all themes, you know, to gain confidence, to increase that public trust, and also to just demonstrate our commitment to listening, responding, and working with the community to address their core concerns. We've also delivered some targeted work around our Safer City campaign. So it started in the city centre to address the concerns raised there, not just about some of the live incidents, but around the perception of safety. And perception is very difficult because the more you promote what you do in terms of the positive action, it can have a negative impact on perception. People naturally feel that if they see drugs warrants taking place, stop and searches, knife archers, oh, well, it must be unsafe because all this work is happening and you're getting results. That's not necessarily the case. There is crime and antisocial behaviour in every pocket of every community across the country. By promoting what we're doing, we want to reassure you that A, we're getting the right information, the right intelligence, so that we can get to the heart of it and we can intervene early before it escalates to more serious harm or crime. But that then has a negative impact for what people see, and particularly now with the way that information is promoted on the news every night, on social media, a lot of misinformation. We have a real challenge to address perception and reality. Doesn't mean they're at odds at times, but they're not always the same. So part of our work is to try to understand how people feel and that perception, and then also give a real-time picture of, we have got some issues here and it's being transparent about that, but this is what we're doing about it, and we are listening, and we want you to be a citizen to work with us, because people have to address their own behaviours, the behaviour of others, and we need that confidence whether they want to report anonymously through Crime Stoppers or through appropriate channels. But it has to be a whole system piece of work, this, to address it, if that makes sense. So we've adopted the Safer City branding, but we've now put it borough-wide because we saw such positive impact around that branding in the city centre itself, that we've adopted that and that initiative, and you'll see that branding across everything we do. We've introduced a new Safer Doncaster partnership newsletter, which is routinely going out to the public, and we are actively working on comms, both South Yorkshire Police's comms and the council comms and the other partners, as we build a broader approach to communicating as much as possible to address perception, but also to respond to those real-time concerns that the community have. And the power of communication is not to be underestimated. It has to be a golden thread in everything we do. So just to summarise then, I suppose the key messages we want you to take away is really that Doncaster is in a good place. Overall crime has fallen by 6.5%, with real notable changes in burglary, theft, arson, criminal damage and violence. Most serious violence continues its long-term decline, with another 7% decrease. Violence against women and girls has again reduced by 4%, and we've got sustained reductions across multiple high harm offence types with positive long-term trends. The antisocial behaviour work has strengthened with the additional hours that we've put in to be visible in communities, and that's a direct response to what the communities have asked for both police resources and for our youth services and for our visible frontline services. Extensive early intervention work has been delivered, as we've mentioned, around these 700 plus young people that have gone through our education programmes, and obviously I'll talk about the Youth Future panels in due course as one of the questions. Doncaster continues to outperform the county in respect of the disruption for organised criminality, with 139 warrants and 156 disruptions. And we've touched on, as in the last slide, around the strengthening picture around our communications, the winter of action that we've just done for the Home Office during December and January. That was previously on the back of the summer campaign. And then, obviously, part of that is that we've reviewed how that communication has landed with the public, and we are getting 45 to 50% open rates across all comms. And comms tell me, I'm not an expert in this field, but they tell me that that is an exceptionally high open rate in terms of the public are interested in what's going out. They are taking the time to read it, and it shows that, you know, safety continues to be a priority for them. Next steps then. So, community safety is a catch-all theme, and it's imperative that we do any work as a partnership. And when I say partnership, we do have a statutory partnership because we are defined in law to do so under the Crime and Disorder Act, and that involves all the big stakeholders you would expect with health, prisons, youth justice, police, council, housing providers. But be under no illusion, this connects with the Thrive agenda, which you'll have heard, in the Thrive approach, which is about making sure it's community-centred, that the voice of the community is at the heart of it, that we work with communities, and what we're doing is not to them, it's with them. So be under no illusion that the Safer Doncaster Partnerships has tried to reflect, reset and embrace that as an approach and build on the work that we're already doing. So this is not two separate agendas, it's a collaborative agenda because it's the right agenda. Our community should be at the forefront, they should have a say, and they should be part of what we do and how we do it. We have done the community safety consultation in the summer of last year. We had the biggest response we've ever had with in excess of 3,000 responses. We also aligned that with a 10-year thematic review of all available information surveys that's been done with the community over the last 10 years to reaffirm what those priorities are. Those priorities will remain within the 6 priorities that we talked about at the beginning of the slides because they remain the focus of attention that the communities want us to look at. That strategy is going through its executive process. It will be going through full council in due course in the next couple of months, and that will be launched in May of this year, officially to cover the next 3 years. That strategy has been aligned to all the other big strategies, Doncaster Delivering Together and the corporate plan, so that this is entwined in everything that we do and that safety is entwined in other strategies that interconnect with it. And we've obviously supported and strengthened the communications plan that supports that strategy in the ongoing work of the partnership. Performance monitoring, that's also been reviewed. We're working to move into the digital arena around Power BI dashboards. But again, going back to that Thrive approach, the qualitative data collection of gathering the voice of community, those stories of positive difference and that impact is part of that monitoring, and we're currently just realigning the delivery plans of the theme groups for the new strategy, the new priorities, the new delivery actions and those delivery outcomes so that we reflect both quantitative, the statistical stuff that we've showed you, but also what we're going to do to capture those stories of difference and that impact in communities. So hopefully what we should have in future presentations is also some of that narrative around what the public are saying and what difference it's made, some good news stories around some of that and case examples. We're also, obviously, we've touched on a few different things. There's a lot of happening on a national level in terms of changes legislatively and around guidance. Some of the key highlights, we've got quite a number of changes coming around our statutory duties around serious violence. We as a council and policing both hold statutory duties, so we're around that serious violence agenda. There is also the new work and the developing guidance and a new national strategy around violence against women and girls. Prevent, which is around the prevention of radicalisation. Again, there's been a review of the Prevent agenda, which sits under the Contest strategy, which is the National Counter-Terrorism strategy. We've had changes. We've had a review by Lord Anderson. There are changes in guidance coming. That is increasing the thresholds and the data capture, particularly around those fixated around violence that's coming into that world as a new category for us to look at. And there's a specific pilot in Sheffield that we are watching around some of that work. And of course, as we've talked about with the off-road bikes and other forms of antisocial behaviour, there's a lot of push nationally to have a look at this in more detail, recognising the impact it has on communities. And of course, we've got changing legislation around environmental. You'll be aware of changes that's currently happening around waste and recycling. It went to businesses, new bins, new ways of working. But of course, a lot of that then has an impact on your environmental and social behaviour. And we've got the residential changes coming from that this year as well. There's a lot of grant activity in this arena that we're working with Simca on, and obviously we do get Home Office monies for some of this, and it comes from other means as well. So we're also looking at how that grant allocation can support the work of the partnership and the resources within it. And of course, specifically for the city centre, for our Connors, for our communities in South with Conisbrough, Deneby and Rosington, we have got additional funding with what you call Pride in Place, previously labelled as long-term plan for towns. The city centre is the first to go live with the Pride in Place. That has had its 4-year investment plan approved. There's a programme of work of which safety and security one will be the core pillars. And I fully expect that safety will feature highly in the other communities that we focus on. And we've left you a glossary because our world is full of acronyms. So we have put that on just to aid a little bit of an understanding, if that would help. That's it from us, Chair. If that's okay.
Well, thank you. Bit of a wow there, really. It sets the standards for presentations, and I thank you very much. Now on to the questions and answers. Just a few rules. I will obviously introduce the person asking the question. When they're happy that they've received the answer, they please make the statement, no supplementaries. If anybody that hasn't asked a question wants a supplementary, please nod towards me and I will bring you in at the right time. So, if I can ask Russ, Councillor Linley, to start the questions procedure, please.
Well, thanks for all that. Hard act to follow, but I'll try. Yeah, you've got a lot of information in there, so yeah, I appreciate all that. But this first question about e-bikes and scooters. Right, e-bikes and scooters potentially dual criminality or even multi-criminality. So, you know, it's not just a speeding or airspeed offence. You know, they're using it for like phone snatching, all sorts of things. Okay. So, do we have any confidence that any capture of the vehicles or the riders will actually necessitate investigations into other potential connected crimes? Sorry, it's a couple of parts question, if you don't mind. So what happens to the bikes and scooters that have been seized? Is there a case to be made for confiscating these vehicles and allocating them to the enforcement officers themselves rather than having public purse to purchase those vehicles? I'm just thinking also on the hoof that some of these seized vehicles will be modified to excessive speeds. So whether you can catch them or not is going to be another matter. And just as a quick aside, I'm sorry, public photos and videos for reporting and identification, are they going to be allowed? Because, you know, what is the legislation on those? Because you're asking for public engagement, if you like, in not trying to catch up with these guys. So is that a viable option for them for taking photos and videos and handing them in? Thank you.
Okay, I will work in reverse order so I can remember that unexpected one first. We regularly put out imagery of people that are of interest to us, so it's not unusual for us to have in the public domain pictures of people that are maybe riding a bike, etc., or that we want to speak to for some reason. I would urge caution to members of the public that are going to potentially put themselves in harm's way by videoing or trying to take photos, no doubt for very positive and good reasons to help us in trying to tackle these people. So I think it's, yes, we would greatly receive any intelligence that helps us identify people, but I would urge caution to members of the public in how they do that. In relation to the points you make about the confiscations and the usage, if we confiscate a vehicle or an e-scooter, bike, etc., and it's deemed to be illegal, it gets destroyed. We don't reuse them or recycle them into our own equipment usage, partly because, as you rightly pointed out, some of them are modified, so the speeds are uncontrolled at points. We're not going to have a liability that sits around a modified piece of equipment, so we buy proper equipment, essentially. It's really difficult to show the provenance of some of the equipment that we seize, so it's easier just to destroy it and, unfortunately, use money to purchase other equipment. And then in relation to the confidence of capture of people, as you rightly point out, are probably involved in other elements of criminality whilst riding one of these e-scooters, bikes, etc. Yes, I think we should have confidence that we do that, and I think I would point to Spoke Alpha as a particular example. So Operation Spoke Alpha was launched in the middle of last year. This is targeting people who steal off-road bikes and e-scooters and then ride them recklessly and dangerously. And what we were seeing in the middle of last year, we were recording around 24, 25 thefts a month. At the end of last year, we recorded 4 a month. Within that 6-month period, we've seized around 30 bikes. We've arrested over 20 people. And part of that is, to use the adage of there's more than one way to skin a cat, then essentially we will look for any potential offences that prosecute those people and take that threat away. So what's been really successful in Operation Spoke Alpha is prosecuting people for other offences and at the same time being able to then seize equipment, seize vehicles, etc. from them and stop them having them. So I think that is in place. Some of the challenge that we see with off-road bikes in particular, some of it is people riding them for fun and recreation. Some people ride them for other nefarious activity. And it's quite hard sometimes to distinguish when you see someone on one what exactly they are going to be doing. So, but we are well aware of that, and our intelligence picture sort of supports our understanding of that a little bit better. So I think we should have some confidence that, yes, we are able to join the dots and look at other opportunities to prosecute people that are using this equipment in the way that they're using it.
Well, that was quite comprehensive. Thank you very much. So I'm just thinking of also illegal working, food deliveries, etc., and other things like, drugs and that. A lot of the giveaway is going to be whether they are wearing balaclavas or not. Obviously, it's more than likely for making it identification very difficult. So just wonder what the follow-up with that is.
There is some real challenge around identification. So as Jackie referenced in her element of the presentation, we are not going to get into a pursuit environment necessarily with someone who's recklessly riding something in a really unsafe manner. There's a risk to themselves, there's a risk to the members of the public that are in the vicinity of that person, and ultimately there's a risk to the officers that might be involved in that as well. So there is some real challenge about how we interact when if someone was to ride past here today, for example, as Jackie described, seeing someone in the town centre, was it yesterday? That isn't necessarily the point where we would seek to act. So it's trying to understand where they've come from, where do they reside, what's the wider intelligence picture, how do we go about identifying that individual. But then there are larger legislative challenges in relation to then what we can do. So we don't have a legal power to enter a private house for some on the suspicion that there might be an off-road bike in there that's been ridden in an antisocial manner. If I suspect it's been stolen, that's very different. But we don't always have that suspicion. So there are gaps in legislation which we've referenced. I will happily send you a list of lobbying points that we've shared quite a number of times with some of your colleagues in relation to what we're seeking in terms of changes around legislation. Because if I had the power to go into people's houses, I could follow them much easier, locate where they are and go in and take the bike, but I don't have the legal power to do that. So there is some real challenge around it.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. No further questions. Thanks, John.
One outside supplementary from Councillor Yellow.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of e-bikes, there's people that use them for nefarious purposes. There's people that ride them antisocially and so on. But there's people that use them simply to go to work. So will the police force have a way to treat this in a human way and to be able to kind of judge this in a human way and not just go necessarily by the letter of the law? Because if the bike is in good condition, there's no issue. The person is literally going to work, let's say. I don't think that's a problem necessarily.
I think my view would be if there's legislation for a reason, and if the person is breaching that legislation, then there's an offence there and there's something that we need to do about it. That doesn't mean that our response is the same as someone who's using an e-bike to deal drugs in the local area, for example, or ride it in a particularly antisocial manner. But until the legislation catches up with the invention, if you like, of e-bikes, it does leave us in a challenging position where there may well be perfectly law-abiding people use them in a perfectly appropriate and safe manner, like you say, just to go about their daily business. But legislation doesn't account for that at the moment. So our role is to uphold the law without fear or favour and is neutral in that position. So we would have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. Just because someone breaks the law doesn't mean they get prosecuted for breaking the law. So I think we've got enough about us to understand the difference of what it would meet the public interest to prosecute somebody and what wouldn't, which is obviously part of our legal threshold that we have to get to bring a prosecution anyway. So that's how we'd approach it.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, when you refer to legislation, do you mean new primary legislation that needs to come in specifically about that? Or, like with e-bikes, it seems to me, I mean, it's a bit like when you had the, you did mention nitrous oxide, and I know a conversation many years ago, Jackie, with you regarding how that was treated, because it was very easy to buy it but use it for nefarious purposes, and it seems to be the same with the e-bike, unfortunately. But, for example, I mean, in terms of primary legislation, what form would that take specifically? Because, I mean, really, by default, everything's primary legislation. That's the point I'm trying to make. But you do have, maybe, say, cases, I would think of maybe someone importing parts of the e-bikes into the country separately, assembling them, and then using them for nefarious purposes or legitimate purposes. You could well approach things that way from a parts perspective, but that might be to do with import and export sort of legislation. I just feel when we say primary legislation, what would that just be a standalone act of Parliament to give the police, like you referred to, extra powers regarding entry into a house? I mean, it would be difficult to get that through. It would certainly be tested in courts galore, wouldn't it, right now with the political settlement we have. I'm just interested because obviously it does strike me that some of these things they all have, there's quite archaic legislation around like bikes and using bikes, isn't there, and stuff, but I don't think this would relate. It's just an interesting idea about primary legislation, that's all.
There's certainly some legislation that's moving through Parliament at the moment, which is, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's something it's a new police-based act, essentially. Forgive me for not remembering exactly what it's. Is it the Police and Crime Bill? Yeah. Yeah. My view would be you could make amendments to that in terms of how you then legislate for the additional powers that are needed, that I feel we need in order to enforce some of the challenge around the ASB use of bikes. And that comes with power of entry, which is one of our biggest challenges at the minute, and how we police it. So yeah, that would be my view, that we need more in that sense. I think the approach that you talk about in terms of, how do we look at importing parts, etc. That's a much more complex, organised problem that wouldn't have an immediate answer for you. But for me, the most straightforward way would be look at additional powers, as we've talked about. It's interesting, there are some legislative points that conflict with some of the challenge around off-road bikes. So in the last few weeks, it happens every winter, you'll notice in some public open spaces, for example, that the grass has been torn up by people riding in those areas. And there's always a conversation at this time of year about why don't we put more bollards or blockers in place to stop people accessing those public parks. There is disability legislation, for example, that talks around access to that provision, which is a blocker to us putting in additional measures sometimes. So legislation's a complex world, isn't it? And there's good bits and bad bits to it all the time.
Yeah, no, I know for a fact we had that at Lakeside when the police installed, as you know, Jackie, with boulders at the entrance to View. That was during COVID. That wasn't off-road bikes specifically. It was more those car meets people were doing, but they were revving up and causing a lot of noise nuisance, and the police did in fact install. But one of the things that came up at that time was disability legislation, not just access to the amenity as well, but obviously access for emergency services. And that conversation regarding boulders happens an awful lot around Bessica. Yeah. Sorry, anyway, it's not another question.
Just for clarity, it's the Crime and Policing Bill. I just got it the wrong way around. That's the piece of legislation actually that's it's all encompassing on a number to review a number of pieces of legislation, including the ASB and Crime Act.
Yeah, just to intersect here, I'm welcome to all questions for as long as we like, but if a question does sort of break into open forum, I'll call time on that question and we can follow it up if everyone's okay with that. So the next one is from me. Now, this is one of those occasions where, obviously, the way we do things, the answers to some of these will have been given. So I'm very happy with what you said about ASB, and I thank you for that. So moving on to the next one, which is again from me. Those among us have different experiences in the acronym world. So will those watching this out on YouTube. So if you could perhaps just run through CPN, ASB patrols, RSPO and EPIC, just in very brief terms, what they are. Thank you.
No, no. In those instances, you'll probably be in the criminal sphere of behaviours, in all fairness, rather than the antisocial. Where the CPN comes in, prior to giving a CPN, you have to give what you call a CPW, which is a community protection warning. So it's a staged approach to addressing behaviours. Once the CPW, which is the warning, once that's been given, if the behaviour persists, then a notice will be given. And then obviously, if notice can be given, and they're used quite often for noise legislation. So if you get somebody who's playing excessive music at the home address, it's having a detrimental impact on the wider neighbours. Routinely, the neighbourhood response team in my area and our environmental teams will issue a CPW. In other words, please refrain from playing it at this. You know, it is causing an antisocial behaviour disturbance as described. It's having a detrimental effect. It's persistent. It's continued. Desist from that. Get it turned down. Or if not, you can be liable to a fine. If that continues or we get repeated calls at the same address, then we can issue what you call a CPN, which is the one that Rachel's explained. And then in the event that that continues, we then follow through to court proceedings, because they'll get issued with a fine. And then if it continues beyond that, we can then look at injunctions, etc. It's also been used to address tense behaviours linked to some of the rough sleeping. It's been used in the city centre where we've needed to as an alternative to the public space protection order. So this is all about the antisocial behaviour of what somebody's how somebody's behaving, or how the business are behaving, and then demonstrating that it's persistent, continued, and unreasonable, and then the impact on the wider public. So it can be used for a range of different behaviours within antisocial behaviour. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Many thanks, Rachel. Anybody else wish to follow up on that? Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I may, I think there's a couple of questions there, but also EPIC. It's not just a hub in the French Gate, it's actually a team that sits within youth services under the youth justice arena. They provide a whole range of work around early intervention and prevention through casework, through education in schools. They do diversion activities. Obviously, the EPIC hub in the French Gate is one example. They have outreach capability at Bowlby and Wheatley. So that's and they're also one of the leads for the youth future panels. So that's a larger team around early intervention prevention around young people who are on the cusp of offending or in the criminal justice process. So that's part of the youth justice management arrangements around early intervention of what used to be the YOS provision.
Many thanks, Jackie. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, there was a supplementary here
Yeah.
for Glenn, and one for me, please, as well.
Is there any laws we can use to stop people drinking on the street?
Yeah, the city
Because a lot of these down and outs, they're supping all sorts of stuff, aren't they, on streets? And then that's when they get aggressive. Like, have you got any change? No, well, F off then. That's what you get.
in the city centre, one of the prohibitions is to prevent substance misuse, so that includes alcohol and drugs. So that is about an open vessel being consumed in a public place. So it doesn't apply to the licensed premises because they're licensed for the consumption of alcohol on the premises. So this is the public space in the town centre, excluding licensed, whether that be off or on. So within the parameters, so it's roughly the ring road around the city for ease, but there is a map and there is a public website you can look at if you want some more information, or please let me know and I'll talk you through it. But that's one of the 7 prohibitions in the city centre. Obviously, our police colleagues, both British Transport Police, South Yorkshire Police, ourselves, we are responsible for the enforcement, and there is some of the regulation enforcement staff also. So if we actively see somebody, we will ask them to dispose of that. We don't have a power to confiscate as a council, but we will ask them to desist. If they fail to do so, they breach the public space protection order, we'll obtain details, we'll issue them with a breach, and that will then potentially lead to a fine. Obviously, if we get into the abusive and aggressive behaviour, we're probably in the region, in the remit of the Public Order Act around causing harassment, alarm, distress, potentially threatening behaviour, or it can then escalate beyond that. Our staff routinely and regularly do receive abuse. Where appropriate, that's reported to the police, and we try to deal with it compassionately, given the individual, because it's not just what people think around the street community. If you think the nighttime economy, people do drink on the street, they become loud, aggressive, abusive. So anybody can fall within that category, not specifically the street community. I take your point, and that is a challenge, because obviously that fuels their addictions. But obviously there's a bit more to this. It's not just dealing with somebody having an open vessel drinking. This is about where did they buy it from out of the access, and that's what we're doing with licensed premises around trying to get the 1 can ban, which is the high strength stuff that you're seeing people drink. Responsible selling is part of that. So, you know, that's why we've got the best bar none, things like that. And obviously the supermarkets, some of them specifically, still choose to sell because they are national chains and a sale is a sale. You know, it's tough times for retailers. You've got to balance all these things in the equation. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do for those that are perhaps driven by substance misuse, where alcohol is perhaps their, their chosen toxin, for want of a better word. What we have to recognise is that we need to get to the root cause, and that's getting them into support. Because really, if they've got nothing to lose, what will a fixed price ticket do? So there's the dilemma, isn't there? Is that, you know, we're trying to give them a utopia of a better life, but a lot of the people we're talking about don't know what utopia is. They've never had that life. And it's getting that trusted relationship, getting that support to get them, when they're able to do so, into services to sort of stop that cycle of behaviour. It's a difficult arena, but we've got to work hand in hand with support services to do that. It's not just a black and white. Difficult challenge, but there is for the city centre in your communities. The PSPOs aren't there, with the exception of Hexthorpe. So yeah, it's something we have to be aware of. I know certainly in the south they've had issues around street drinking, etc. It's normally looked at as a problem-solving approach with the community safety, the local stronger communities teams, South Yorkshire Police, St Ledger Homes, and we try to address it based on who are the individuals involved, what's the impact on the place, what does the place look like, what's the support services, what alternatives are there, what other choices can people make. You have to look at the big picture and the problems and look at who's there to support, and everybody's in that, the community, the voluntary sector, the key statutory services, etc., and of course the businesses. Does that answer it enough for you? There isn't one size fits all. You've got to look the unique challenges in the areas with the people involved.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on the last bit of the monologue, I think record keeping in terms of certain individuals that are the most disruptive and that are repeatedly engaging in antisocial behavior and so on, and street drinking and so on, the record keeping needs to be, I'd say, better, because you can see the same behavior being brought forward by the same individuals. So at a certain point, the support option needs to end, and the enforcement option needs to come into play. Also, and this is generated. This is generated by the fact that I was looking at the activity in town centre, and I was seeing these regulations being brought forward and enforced, in quotes, by red vests, not necessarily by police. I think that's a serious problem, because the amount of authority that the red vests have is basically the amount of authority I've got. Will these patrols in town centre and the increase in patrols and the increase in security be done by police or by red vests?
I think it needs to be a combination of both. The red vests, as you refer to them, do have some powers. Obviously, it's not the same as a fully warranted police officer. There is a mechanism to allow additional powers to be bestowed on a civilian uniform presence, like the red. Stop calling them red vests, but the red vests. And that is something that's been discussed, actually. There's some training implications around that and some cost implications, but there is a scheme that allows for additional powers to be delegated to the staff, but they do have additional powers already. I think there's some challenge about enforcement, as Jackie's sort of outlined in her answer previously. We're not going to enforce our way out of this problem. We could go and arrest people, we could put them before the courts. That's not going to stop them being on the streets. So we have to think really carefully about that much wider, multifaceted approach with the key partners to make sure that they've got the right help and support to try and transition them away from that lifestyle. Yes, there will be a cohort of people that are no doubt very regularly known to both Jackie's teams and the teams in the city centre, but it's not something we can just enforce our way out of for the reasons that Jackie's outlined previously. In terms of our investment in the city centre, we last year created the dedicated city centre team, which we didn't have before. We had a larger central team that covered areas including Wheatley and Hexthorpe, for example. So that team was particularly stretched. Some of the key demand ward areas for us are Town, Hexthorpe, Wheatley, Balby. So that team was very stretched from a neighbourhood policing point of view. We were able to put additional resources into the city centre and create the dedicated team. So I can happily share with you the facts that show where our officers have been in the city centre day by day, week by week, month by month since the summer. We are doing hundreds and hundreds of hours of additional patrolling in the city centre at all times of the day and night. And that is something that Jackie referenced about the VisiBeat app that she mentioned in her update. And the council trying to get that same piece of equipment so it can show you lifetime where officers have been and where they've been and if they're on foot in a vehicle, etc., etc. And that's something we are more routinely sharing with the public to try and show that we are out and about and more visible than perhaps we were before.
I hope that's not live, because that would not be very safe for the officers, the patrols tracking.
Well, the officers are in uniform anyway, so I'm not sure there's necessarily that much of a safety issue in terms of them being lively tracked. But no, what we tend to do is collect the data and show it in a map. So you'll see a map that has lots of orange blobs on it on a month-by-month basis and the hours that they've been out on foot.
Very well. And you were mentioning that the youth support service, is also has an outreach arm for Balby. I've not seen anything of that sort. If you could expand on it, sorry.
Yeah, I could get some more details for you to show you exactly what they're doing. It's also not my service, so I don't have the specifics, but I'm more than happy, Chair, if that's okay.
If you
I'll
can
come
email
back.
it, that'll
Yeah,
do.
no
Thank
problem
you.
at all. I could give you the specifics about what that activity looks like for Balby Wheatley, and obviously the city ones routinely, day in, day out, mostly. We adjust and flex the opening times based on whether it's school holidays, whether it's really what the kids want and where the volume is. I don't have the specifics of Balby and Wheatley. I just know there's outreach, and that's been consistent now for some time, but more than happy to provide that.
If I can expand on the patrols bit, because that will eliminate a question at the end for me. In terms of the patrols, because we've had a drop in various areas of criminality and antisocial behavior, will those resources be allocated to patrols now? And will we see more patrols in our wards and visible patrolling as well to deter certain behaviors?
Resources won't be reallocated based on the crime rates because of the way we operate as a district. We have a number of responsibilities and risks that we manage that we've not reported on in the data that we've reported you today. What we have done in the last 12 months, because of the neighbourhood policing grant that was issued by the new Labour government, we've increased the number of officers that are in our neighbourhood policing team posts. So we've had an additionality of officers put into all the neighbourhood policing teams across the district. And like I say, we've created the additional city centre team itself. So we have put, for the first time ever, well, certainly since I've been in this district, we've got a fully functioning, fully staffed team in the neighbourhood policing teams. And we've never had that before. In order to maintain the grant, that's something that we have to maintain. That's not new cops coming to Doncaster. That is me moving resources around into the neighbourhood policing space. So I suppose, to your point, we've kind of done that already by making sure that we filled all the gaps in our neighbourhood policing teams.
Is the grant decided upon by council or Simca?
It's a government grant, so it comes through the Home Office.
Okay, Councillor Lindley, you fine with that answer? Yeah.
Chair, just one final point, just around the strengthening of the legislation, the police and crime bill we mentioned. Going back to your point about the people who are persistent, the only tool available to council officers at this moment for the persistent behaviour beyond the PSPO, so if you get somebody with multiple breaches, would be to pursue an injunction, which is civil. But even if somebody breaches it, I've got no further powers to do a great deal with it. Under that new piece of legislation that's going through Parliament, the Police and Crime Bill, they're going to change injunctions to what you call remedy orders. And if you breach a remedy order, it will become criminal. So they are trying to strengthen the civil side, because the government are definitely pushing antisocial behaviour towards local authorities, recognising that we have a role in the space as an aside to the police. So it's broadening the again, everybody's responsibility to address what's widespread in communities, if that helps. So there is legislation change to try and beef it up, but it's called a remedy order, and it comes in that new piece of legislation. And we will actively pursue remedy orders. We've already had several injunctions granted to address persistent behaviour. One is notable. We've had over the last couple of years, and then we've had one just before Christmas, and the gentleman was served while he was in prison, so that we addressed his behaviour as soon as he came out. So we have been successful on injunctions as well. More work to do.
Thank you. Councillor Lindley asking the question that we all wanted to ask. Ooh, sorry. Over to you, Lee. Question 4.
Cheers, thank you. And thanks again for the presentation. It was really, really enlightening. There's a growing issue with legal parking on unadopted roads. For example, block pavements, drop curbs, and also parking too close to junctions. I have been informed that there's nothing enforcement can do as it's unadopted. Is that true? And if so, what can be done to resolve this?
If I can just add on that, what we tend to do is, a classic example of this is a new housing estate, because during the development of the estate, it's only at the end of the development are the roads formally adopted, even if you've got tarmac surfaces. Reason I know that, I live on one, and I know parking has been an issue for different reasons. There's been some community meetings about it. So what we try to do is engage local residents, understand the nature of the problem, look at the timescales for adoption. We also then can also work with South Yorkshire Police, who do hold powers for obstruction. Depending if you're near junctions, there's statutory limits around 10, 20 metres from junction edges. It's all about the danger it may cause to road users, pedestrians, etc. So again, it's back to your problem-solving approach, understanding what's happening, engagement with the communities, looking at the civil or criminal powers that we need to do, and not using a sledgehammer to crack a nut when actually engagement might resolve the problem. And obviously understanding at the point it becomes an adoption, what more can we then do? So that there's a legacy to it. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks for that. No further questions.
I think you've probably covered quite a bit of this. This is a question that was handed to us late last night, so hopefully this will come through okay. How many arrests for begging were recorded during the period that the 32% increase occurred? You'll follow that okay?
I can't give you the arrest figures, but no. I can, I suppose, speak freely and say we wouldn't arrest for begging. Under the Public Space Protection Order, the council don't have a power of arrest. We're not warranted officers. PSPO allows us to deal with that through a fine process. If you wanted to arrest, you would have to look at the Vagrancy Act, which is in the process of being repealed by Parliament. So it's not one that we'd actively pursue, because it's actually nationally we're being given a steer not to, but it's being repealed at this moment in time.
Sorry, there is a follow-up to that. It just says, is the matter viewed as a priority regarding the tackling of this issue by the police, as it features highly in numerous complaints made by visitors to the city on local social media? So obviously, from that statement, it's widely seen as a problem, if you like, particularly a visual problem. So, yeah.
I think it forms part of our commitment around ensuring we're doing everything we can to make the city centre feel and be as safe as possible. But as Jackie's outlined already, I'd be amazed if we've arrested anyone for begging in the last 12 months, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I don't think that's the answer. And I'll refer back to those points we've outlined around the wider partnership approach around the challenge of it. And we're not going to enforce our way out of a begging problem, as we've already sort of outlined.
Yeah, I think you sort of mentioned that, or you sort of made reference to that when you're talking about the root cause of an issue. So, following that up, it's looking at what the problem is and what you can do to provide for it I guess that's it, is it?
I think that's exactly it. And I think if you look at the work that's been done to support sex workers, for example, you look at the rates of prostitution-related ASB, that's fallen by, I think, 65% in the last year. That's not been achieved by enforcement. That's been achieved by a really comprehensive, joined-up approach to make sure that the people are getting the right help and support that takes them away from that area and puts them into a better position, so they're not having to seek that as an opportunity to get money, to support their drug addiction, etc., etc. So I think we've got some really good examples where, through partnership working, we've made significant impact and differences to some of the ASB-related problems, and begging's no different to that.
Chair, if I just may just add on to that, what we have tried to do is approach begging in a different way. It's not just about the person sat there with a cap in front of them. We've also got to respond to that humanitarian response from the public, giving somebody money, because they may want to, because why wouldn't you if you can see somebody in need? And even if somebody's saying, I want it for food, for a drink or whatever, there's something we've been promoting for quite some time now called the Real Help campaign. What we're trying to get the public to do is, please, if you want to donate and help, do it through the campaign, because the monies from that are being managed to help people get the basics in life, and when we can get them into stable accommodation, to provide the provisions in that accommodation, because remember, they've got nothing. So if we can channel that humanitarian response in the right way, we want people to help, but do it in a way by we can give them what they need at the right time to support them getting back on the feet into stable accommodation and those next life steps. And obviously we are working with our voluntary sector around the food, drink offer, and obviously we are creating a new safe space in the city to support that. So hopefully that should, again, it's a jigsaw piece we're putting together. It's not one thing that's going to resolve some of the issues we face. It's a number of things, but fundamentally it's recognising that is a vulnerable person first and foremost. I appreciate they may be begging. That might cause people to feel unsafe. It might cause a wider antisocial behaviour issue. We've got all these things to address, not just the enforcement side, and we will not enforce our way out of this. That is absolutely the sense. We've got to look at the big picture. We've got to put all the different things in place, and we've got to consider all avenues.
Thanks, Jackie. I am getting a little bit conscious of time now. The question from Jan. Could I make this the last one on this question, please?
Thank you, Chair. In regards to not enforcing on our way out of it, I disagree partially. I think the support that the council is already providing for people in need that get to the point where they need to beg in order to survive, the support options that we have are numerous and extensive, from accommodation to food to clothes and so on. So that's being already done. So enforcing, I think, is quite needed, because there's an element of criminality here, and there are people that are being forced into those roles, as I've seen all around Europe, and there are countries that are really struggling with that element. So once that's done, once the support is being offered, the fines are being issued, and the repeated behavior becomes a pattern, is there an enforcement option then?
There is always an enforcement option, but I would point to shoplifting as an example, where we can enforce shoplifting, we can send someone to prison for shoplifting. The reality is, at the moment, they'll go to prison for about 4 weeks, and then they'll be back again. And actually, some of the causes of shoplifting is to do with drug addiction, dependency, etc. Some of the things that are driving the other antisocial behaviours in the town centre, city centre. So I would still push back on the point that enforcement is always an option, but the criminal justice system has to be there to support that enforcement to its maximum benefit. And using that example, I think, of shoplifting as an example, it stops a problem short term, but people go to prison, they don't necessarily get the right help and support, or they don't leave prison fixed of the dependencies and some of the challenges that they had that drove them to crime in the first place before they went into prison. So again, I would fall back to that point that enforcement as an option, but it's not going to solve the problem.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, could I ask you to run 5 and 6 together, please?
Thank you. This one's about reducing substance and alcohol misuse. Are there any barriers which prevent people from accessing support, and how do we encourage early intervention to prevent problems escalating?
Yeah, if I can pick that up. I've spoken to our public health lead, Helen Conroy, to get more specifics for you. And if you need any more details, she's given me a quick summary. So she's the chair of our substance misuse theme group. From Helen's perspective and the information available to her, there are no major barriers in terms of preventing people accessing support. But what they do appreciate is that those working Monday to Friday may struggle to access, such as the Aspire service, as they're not open on a weekend. So at the moment, that provision is Monday to Friday. There's obviously a number of different routes people can access via national telephone helplines, etc. But there is a recognised need that current service is Monday to Friday. In terms of substance misuse, clients not accessing mental health services when identified as needing mental health support is a group of concern, but public health are currently looking at that to address it. So that's the response to that. No major barriers, just recognising the limitations of the funding when services are provisioned and they're trying to cater to the majority. Do you want me to go straight into the next one? Yes. So you asked, how do you encourage early intervention to prevent escalated problems? A lot of early intervention around preventing problems escalating is public awareness and making sure that the information of what the problem is, how do you identify it yourself, how does your family members identify it, how do people recognise it, and then what do they do in terms of about it. It's all done through prevention campaigns, which are often communications campaigns, posters, leaflets, social media posts, etc. So examples of this is Rethink Your Drink campaign, for those using drugs, access to clean equipment, full harm reduction offer so that we intervene early. There is obviously a number of treatment pathways depending on the level of need. And then also Project 6, Sober Social, offer drop-ins in the city centre. And obviously we've got a dedicated youth offer through Zone 5 to 19 as well, which is coordinated from the Flying Scotsman. And there's obviously different drop-ins that can be accessed in different communities. So early intervention is a driver for us as a partnership, because what we shouldn't wait is for something to reach a critical or crisis status. So the more prevention that we can, the more information that's available for people to self-help, but also then look at what support can be available from their nearest and dearest, what can be available through, for example, your workplaces, through your occupational health focus. There's all different offers, and it's just recognising, if we give people the information, what might be right for them, because there is no one standard offer. You've got to look at what's right for the individual and where they're most comfortable to seek that support at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Nick. Right, the next one, down from me, reducing crime and reoffending. Peter and I have already had a chat about this, and we're going to do that in the margins, as we call it. We'll deal with that one separate. So over to you, Lee, if you could, question 8, please.
Thanks, Chair. In my own ward of Rosington and Bawtry, there's a petition to reopen the public desk at the police station in Rosington. The reason for this is that the residents are saying that they are having difficulty in reporting crime, both online and over the phone. They say that they are being kept on the phone for long periods of time. Do you find this is a wider issue in Doncaster? If so, what can be done about it? And also, are there any other barriers to reporting crime and antisocial behaviour?
Thanks for that. I've no doubt on occasions there will be challenge when people ring us, and there will be delays. We have now started publicising monthly data that shows the impact or effectiveness of our call handling centre. So I can report to you today that, for example, in January we received 20,446 emergency calls to 999 in the month of January. There was an average wait time there of 2 seconds before the phone was answered, and 97% of all those calls were answered within 10 seconds. For the same period for 101 calls, which is obviously probably more likely the references that you're making, we received 40,825 non-emergency calls in January. The average wait time there was 1 minute and 10 seconds. The median wait time for those calls was 9 seconds, and that's reducing month on month as we've seen recently. What we also do have is something called a queue buster system. So if your call isn't answered within a minute, you can opt to have a call back. So you don't have to stay on the phone. You can hang up the phone and your call will be returned. And that service is used over 4,000 times in January by people contacting us. We clearly have a number of other online reporting mechanisms as web chats. There's all sorts of ways you can contact us. But I do accept that that isn't necessarily the most accessible way for some members of the community. There is no, and there will be no appetite to reopen the public desk at Rosington. I know there's a petition that is running at the moment. We've had dialogue with Simca about that as well. But that's not something in our long-term planning around having a public desk reopened. The only public desk that is open in the borough is obviously at College Road. And the force is taking steps over time for budgetary reasons to look at the provision of public desks across the whole of the force. So while the College Road one will remain, there's no plans to reopen any others. I think what we have done since the conversations about Rossington have sort of developed in the coming previous weeks is I've asked the neighbourhood police inspector, A.D. Luscombe, to look at how we can ensure that where we run maybe some pop-up events and we run some surgeries for local people to come to in person and see one of the PCSOs, for example, there are still PCSOs that are working out of Rosington Police Station. So I do think there's some opportunities to look at how we can support members of the community in Rosington in particular. But I think what is helpful is now that we've started to publish some of our call data and handling data, the volume of calls we get is huge. There's a significant challenge around that, but I do think we've got some good mechanisms in place where if you don't want to stay on the phone, for example, you can hang up and you'll get a return call. In terms of the barriers, I think probably, this is me guessing, but I would imagine some of the challenge will be there's a perception where if you ring, you're not going to get through, so why bother ringing? Or if you ring and you do get through, then we don't seem to do anything about it anyway, so again, why bother ringing? And I think that really points back to some of the efforts that we talked about in the presentation about trying to be much more on the front foot about some of the impact that the SSDP has had and trying to give a much clearer, and I think that's maybe why we've bamboozled you with graphs and charts and data today, because we're trying to be really transparent in what the picture is so people can get a better understanding of what's actually, what we record and what we do about stuff, in the hope that people start to see that actually, if you do report something to us, we will try our best to do something with it. There are constraints and challenges around some of the things that we have to deal with. But that's an ongoing journey for us, I think, in terms of the public's confidence in us as an organisation and our partner organisations to ensure that when you tell us about something, we do something about it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And like I say, them times you quoted was amazing, but unfortunately that's not the experience my residents have had. But I'll digress. So yeah, well that's it really. Well, thanks for that.
Like I say, I think there will always be instances where people are left on the phone, and those are the ones that stick in the memory of where they've had that challenge. But certainly, if I can offer you some assurance, then with the local neighbourhood policing team looking at what else we can do in terms of certainly for the non-emergency sort of pieces where we've got some further engagement opportunities with the communities locally, we can certainly look at that.
Thank you, and sorry for taking so much of your time with my supplementaries, but when it comes to the communication, my experience and some of my constituents' experience with dialing 111, for example, was quite convoluted. It was hard to get to the point, really. There were all sorts of options that you had to go through, and you'd wait, and sometimes it literally just puts you on hold, and you'd be there for forever. You have to call again. And that was my personal experience as well with it. So we've had good results with some communication campaigns that we had in terms of waste management and so on in council, where we were talking about these leaflets that you'd use a fridge magnet to put them on your fridge, and you got all the information there with bin days and you name it. Something of this sort. Could this be done by the police as well? Because you'd have that information in front of you, and it's something that you can look at every single day and kind of get it into your memory. In the sense that you would call 111 for this reason, you'd call 999 for this reason. You'd approach that situation in that manner. I think it's just simply a matter of using a communication campaign and other means to bring that message to people.
Yeah, we certainly do, through our own channels, our own public-facing social media channels, routinely put messaging out about the routes to report to us, under which circumstances to report us, with 999 for the emergencies, 101 for the non-emergencies, and the other reporting routes. So we do actively use campaigning to do that. Whether we've produced fridge magnets, as an example, I don't think we have. And I'm not sure that's something we'd necessarily look at, but I can certainly raise it with my colleagues in the call centre in the control room. But I think it's probably more likely we would look at how we continue to put that messaging out through our existing channels about the routes to report to us and the way you can report to us, and how we do that on the ground, talking about how we're looking at some of the engagement events that we regularly do with the pop-up police stations and all the rest of it through the neighbourhood policing teams. That's maybe where the opportunity is. Maybe we could look at how we produce something that is just a guide for people to understand where to go. I think that's probably how we'd achieve that locally. Yeah, again, I don't think that's something, it's not something I've not thought about. It's maybe something to pick up outside of this conversation, give me time to think about how we could do that. There's always challenge with members of the community in making, and when we do written media, one of the main things is around language and availability of the right language for the household, etc., etc. So, and making sure that people can fully understand, be really clear about how we communicate with them. So, it's something to think about.
Chair, if you want to just come in on the final point around that, we've actually done quite a lot of work around the reporting mechanisms through the Report It campaign, which has been a joint campaign, so that the public can use, for example, with antisocial behaviour, they can report to the council or the police, because we'll still talk to each other. And what we've tried to do is explain the different types of antisocial behaviour which could be reported to which organisation, and the methods to do that, whether that's through your local pop-ups, your community engagement meetings, through digital forums, because what we recognise is not everybody's digitally enabled. Perhaps it's one for us, if I contact you separately, is I'll show you what we've already done, and then we can look at what more could be done. It's probably an action we can take away, if that's okay. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you both. Peter, question 9, I think mostly answered in your presentation, and we've agreed to make that part of our follow-up chat. Happy with that? We'll move on from question 9 on that basis. Councillor Whiting, if you care to deal with 10 and 11 together, please.
Yep, it's about serious organised crime. Can you please explain what is an ICN crime? How does Doncaster perform with that? And there's reference to bronze meeting in this area. Would there be a benefit in councillors attending that?
Okay, so ICN crime essentially stands for informal cash networks. So this is essentially how organised groups launder money. It's a system of essentially money is banking without using a bank. Is that informal? So essentially, it's a way of banking without using a bank. So it's a system that works basically on trust and honour, and it very rarely has any written documentation to support it. It's done by word of mouth, effectively. There is no dedicated offences of ICN, but what there is legislation in the statute that relates to money laundering and other financial sort of offences that deal with financial law. Locally, we don't run money laundering investigations into the way we, let me rephrase that, the way we manage our organised crime groups and where we investigate them, we in part rely on colleagues from other areas, and particularly in regional resources, so the regional organised crime units, etc., and the National Crime Agency as well at points. So I've got no data to show you in terms of specifically. What I can say is that when we're looking at money laundering offences as an example that might represent ICN, but it might not, we've seen increases in the reporting of money laundering offences in the last few years. We generally solve around 3/4 of all those reports that are made to us, so it's a very high action take, what we call an action taken rate, where we bring in prosecution. And the volume of money that is confiscated or seized through some of this organised work has risen significantly in the last couple of years as well. So I can't give you actual data that's broken down just to Doncaster. But what we also do is we've ran something called Operation Machanise, which is targeting what seem to be cash-rich entities. So vape shops is an example where there's a wider public health concern where clearly illicit cigarettes and illegal vapes are being sold, but that may well highlight a wider issue that maybe links to the ICN networks and the way that money is laundered through organised criminality. I am not saying that every vape shop or every hairdresser's is a front for an organised crime group. I just want to be really clear about that. But there are elements where we are looking at some what appear to be cash-rich business and wondering where that money is coming from, I think is how I'd phrase that. In terms of the bronze meeting, with the greatest respect, I don't think there's a place for councillors on that meeting. It's a tactical level meeting where we're dealing with intelligence and coordination of our agencies in terms of the response to organised crime. Where I do feel you've got a really big role, though, is trying to support members of the community reporting intelligence to us. And we've worked with a number of councillors in the past around trying to give confidence to members of the community when they report things to us, what will happen. In terms of that worry sometimes of being seen to report something to us, is there a consequence to that person? And I'd happily give you some more information to share with your constituents about what that process looks like and work with the local neighbourhood policing teams to support that, because that would be really key. We are always thirsty for intelligence and to act on. So that would be, I think, your role within it.
I think question 11. What actions are being taken to protect young people from exploitation, and how effective are they?
So I've made an assumption, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but you're referencing still the organised crime space in terms of exploitation. There's several main elements. So part of the way that we manage the organised crime groups, we obviously have focus around certain elements, something called cuckooing, which is essentially where a vulnerable person's address is taken over and there is like a cuckoo. And also, though, through where we have evidence that children or vulnerable people are being used in that network of drug dealing on what we call a county line network. So as we're doing that OCG management work and mapping, if we come across or assess that there's a clear drug line such as that, we have a matrix that we use to highlight and identify risk and harm. So that's used, and then depending on what that comes out that, will elicit certain disruptions and enforcement activity to try and protect those people that are involved and disrupt the network. One of the other real challenges around exploitation comes from something called the COM network and the COM threat. So this is exploitation of children online as an emerging issue. This is where children are being exposed to self-harm ideology. They are effectively bullied online and extorted online and are coerced into committing various offences, whether it's violence or other offences against other people, or in the proliferation of, for example, child sexual abuse imagery and things like that. That is a growing concern nationally, is the COM threat. And it's something that's really only come to light, I suppose, we've only started briefing about it in the last 12 months. Currently, there are no COM-linked investigations in Doncaster. There are COM-linked investigations in South Yorkshire, and I imagine it'll only be a matter of time before there is one in Doncaster. It's a really worrying space, and I can happily share with you the appropriate brief around a bit more detail about the COMNEX work. There's all sorts of vernacular in it. There's a sensation called swatting, where people ring the police to say that, you know, Pete Thorpe's in his house with a gun, and I'm actually just sat in bed reading my comic, and a load of armed cops burst into your house because we think you've got a gun. So that's what's called swatting. So that's one of the tactics that's used, and it's used to intimidate and bully people effectively online and coerce them into perpetrating other offences. We also have a multi-agency approach around migrant children that might come into the country and then slip into exploitative or routes. So we have a process that works with key partners with immigration, in particular, and children's social services, where unaccompanied minors are identified at point of entry and they're essentially scooped up. And we also have something locally called the MACE process. So that's the multi-agency child exploitation meetings. So they happen on a regular basis where threat, harm and risk is mapped out in relation to the risks of those children being exploited. And then there's a multi-agency intervention to put the right safeguarding and prevention work in to stop them being exploited. So there is quite, depending on the type of exploitation, it's a really complex space, whether it's criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, etc., and can happen in a multifaceted way. It's either in person, online. It's a huge challenge for us collectively. And I think it's really difficult to give you a data set to say how effective we are, because actually, you know, the children that go through MACE, for example, if we see that child's level of risk reduce and the mapped risk, the scoring of that risk, we could produce data that says, yes, we've seen a number of children's risk reduce, and therefore we're probably being effective in some of the countermeasures that we've employed to stop that. But equally, crime recording might go up because the number of sexual offences, for example, may well rise because we're better at identifying and finding those victims. So I can give you a little bit more detail maybe out of this meeting about the effectiveness of it, but it is a very complex space with a lot of different elements to it.
Thank you. Limit to one outside secondary. Councillor Yarn, please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of tackling serious and organized crime, my thought is that you need good quality evidence to prosecute and bring criminal charges. So for that purpose, when it comes to the city, stock of video surveillance equipment, cameras and facial recognition cameras and so on, is that going to increase? Is that going to be improved? Is there anything being done in that space?
So we already have a very high level of provision for CCTV in the city, and I think Jackie would no doubt quote a fact that she's told me before about how we've got more cameras here than I think we've got in Sheffield. That's one element to it. Facial recognition is not something that's used here at the moment. There's national work going on around the use of facial recognition, and there's only something in the news in the last couple of weeks about the government's plans to roll out facial recognition capability wider. But I think even then we're only talking about a limited number of vehicles that are equipped with it in that way. We obviously have other things such as ANPR, which is the number plate readers that sit in vehicles and ping to if we've got a suspicious vehicle in the area. I think really our success for the way we deal with our OCGs in part is reliant on CCTV, but there's a myriad of other lines of inquiry, some of which are very sensitive that I'm not going to go into, that are far more productive and effective in terms of how we manage that cohort of offending.
Thank you. Right, slightly unusual, but because you just mentioned the words, could I ask Councillor Allen to jump to question 15 and then resume with 12?
Thank you. Yeah, question 15. I have been informed that there is no fund budget to repair broken or vandalised CCTV cameras in and around the Doncaster area. Is this true?
Yeah, I'll pick it up. No, not entirely. Two budgets that we're talking about. So let me just give you an overview of CCTV, because I know it was in a point that Ian mentioned as well. So in terms of CCTV in Doncaster, there's 2,316 cameras. Yeah. And we've then, in addition, got 60 redeployable. So the fixed cameras are the 2,000 plus. We've got 60 which are redeployable across the 5 localities. And all those 2,000 plus the extra redeployable ones, they are across localities. Now, in terms of the redeployable ones, which is the 60 that I think you're talking to about broken or repaired, I suppose that's the bit. Are we talking about the mainstream cameras or the redeployable ones in the question? So I'll answer it as best I can from both. The redeployables, at the moment, we have a £9,000 budget, which is split between South Yorkshire Police, My Service and St Ledger Homes. That budget is purely for the structural testing of lighting columns, the installation of electrical power sockets and the installation of the cameras. Yeah, there is no maintenance budget for broken, vandalised of the redeployables. And obviously that includes making them safe if they're cut down, for example, and we've had a number of instances where that's happened. We have got some hotspot areas, Hexthorpe, Hyde Park, Woodlands, etc., where the cameras have repeatedly been attacked. So there is no budget for repair from that perspective. And in terms of those redeployables, the spend this year is at 23,900. So worth nearly 3 times over budget because of vandalism. It's literally targeted damage. That's where we're having to make them safe, but it doesn't mean we can replace them because A, we don't carry lots of stock and there isn't a budget for that stock unless we get additional money for extra redeployables. Does that make sense? Yeah? So that's that bit. There is a maintenance budget for the main public realm cameras, although this hasn't grown in line with the number of cameras that's been increasing over the years. Of those 2,316, we also have a number that we monitor for St Ledger, 729 of those, which is at specific locations on St Ledger Estate. That they include Balby Bridge, Intake Flats, Shoreline Depot, Craggs Estate and Calendar Court. There is no budget for the ongoing electrical charges for the redeployable cameras. There's no budget to remove the cameras because we have to demonstrate pressing need to keep them. And therefore, obviously, if there's a reluctance to move them, then we've got no budget to do some of the work with. That entire policy around the redeployables is currently under review as a result of me looking at the service. Obviously, I've already took over 6 months ago because to be compliant with the Surveillance Commissioners Code, the Information Commissioners, etc., anything that's in a temporary location, such as the redeployables, which you will all ask for as part of your response to problems in the communities, we have to demonstrate legally a pressing need. My review, and I've worked with the audit within the council to look at this, we need to be legislatively compliant. That's why the policy is under review. There will be changes to the policy, and therefore we will have to demonstrate pressing need to keep cameras at locations. Can't keep them there forever and a day. Legally, we're not compliant. And then we are taking a paper to the Safer Doncaster Partnership around that budget and looking at how we can look at its use, whether we've got options to increase the budget so that it's not just about the installation. To be compliant, we're going to have to move them, which means we need more budget to move. And then if you want to repair, particularly where we've got hotspots, where it's literally repeatedly getting attacked, what are we going to do? Because CCTV might not be the answer. We need to look at the toolkit of crime reduction measures. There's not one size. So this is currently a picture that's under review, if that makes sense. The budget's not fit for purpose. The policy needs updating. We need to be legislative compliant, and we need to look how we design the crime out. Does that answer that bit?
Thank you both. Care to finish off your role with question 12, Councillor Allen?
Can we have more information on youth futures panels, and do you feel it would be appropriate for councillors to be in attendance? And some basically a sort of brief update about making the nighttime economy safer. Although I said that was covered in the presentation, so if you want to omit that, do.
Yeah, I can pick that up for you. In terms of giving you more information, I'm more than happy to send you a brief afterwards with a bit more detail. It actually launches Businesses Against Abuse today. There's an event, workshop, and the training has commenced today.
To everybody, please, Jackie, in the group.
Yeah, Yeah, so I can give you more rather than going into it in more detail here, but businesses against abuse is linked to the Vogue agenda and part of the nighttime economy. So I'll send you something separately about that and the training that we are doing in collaboration with DRASACS. Started in Cambridgeshire, it's now been adopted in different forces. We're the pilot for South Yorkshire, so one of the first national ones to go live with it. So I'll send you some further details separately, just conscious of time, which gives you a summary. In terms of, if I then link it to the nighttime economy and what we're making our nighttime economy safer, a range of different things really. The street safe policing operation every weekend, there's then that strengthened during the bank holiday periods where we'd expect high demand. My staff, the shift pattern has been changed. We are into the evening economy, so we provide some resilience in the wider footprint of the city to make sure people can, I suppose, enjoy the city from the point they enter from the buses, the trains or through vehicles, so that we've got that visible presence, that positive engagement, particularly where they're attending not just the pubs in the city centre and the traditional spots, but your cast theatres and other venues. So that's a joint approach. We've also had additional funding through what you call the GRIP programme, which is a national programme which is around that increased visibility. That's definitely supporting that most serious violence reduction and the work that it does, and that's about identifying the hotspots. City centre, Lower Wheatley, parts of Hexthorpe, all in that top 15 hotspots for the county, and there's been additional hours put in with pulse patrols in of 20-minute evidence-led approach, really, from the National College of Policing. Council have adopted that methodology as well. So my staff have done that right from April onwards. It supported the summer and winter of action campaigns. That's part of our approach towards nighttime economy. In addition, you'll be aware that we've introduced Best Bar None. Again, well in excess of 20 businesses now signed up to that, and we continue to promote that and that accreditation. We've also got the Safe Haven, which is a partnership with the Unitarian Church and some of the volunteers which are coming from the NHS. And of course, our Violence Against Women and Girls group that Councillor Coby supports, they're also linked into that. They offer a spot in the nighttime economy to work collaboratively with the outreach of the street pastors to identify vulnerable people, ensure that they receive the appropriate support, whether that's first aid, whether it's water, flip-flops, whether it's signposting to other services, whether it's just making sure we get hold of a family member or getting them to a taxi so that they're safe. I've mentioned and touched on the great work that the street pastors and the volunteers, they've been an established resource for us for a number of years, and they continue to do a sterling job to support people. We've also then increased our presence in and around the taxi ranks with the taxi marshals, and again, it's just to make sure that those spaces when people and drink are free from violence, people can exit and obtain taxis safely and they can get home safely. And obviously I've touched on the business against abuse. In addition, to address some of the perception-based issues around particularly the nighttime economy, we are working to achieve the Purple Flag Award, which is an international accreditation around our city centre being safe, vibrant and well managed. Barnsley are our collaborative partner on that. They've achieved it. This is the 7th year in a row. So we're currently setting up a workshop to pull that piece of work together and again work towards that accreditation. It's just, again, how do we address perception? I know we're active when we're doing lots of things, but an accreditation is just a supplementary way of demonstrating that we have achieved certain standards. And it's about achieving excellence, striving for excellence, and demonstrating it is safe, vibrant, and that we want to promote those standards in everything we do. The Youth Future panels, if I can just quickly touch on that, and again, if you want some more information, I can send you that separately. This is a national pilot led from a government initiative around youth justice. We were one of the pilot areas. We did receive initially 1-year funding. We've had further funding confirmed, so it will go beyond the 1 year. We've established panels locally to support children who've had contact with the Criminal Justice Service, but they've not had a formal outcome, in other words, a conviction or a statutory intervention. So we can see they're on the cusp of it. There hasn't been an outcome for it, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't act. So there's the panel's been established. There is a cohort of young people that have been identified. And obviously what we're doing is engaging them to work with them so that we support them to recognise where their behaviour and the consequences of that behaviour so that they can make more positive choices, or we can provide additional support to them or the family setting. Does that make sense? All positive in terms of early engagement, the setup of the panels, and obviously those panels seek to intervene early for vulnerable young children, better coordination of the services to identify and support them, hopefully reduce crime because it stops any potential offending and improving the youth wellbeing. And of course, it's a tested model that we'll look to roll out, and obviously being a county pilot, hopefully Simca are watching this one closely so that this will get rolled out for the other areas as well as. But it's a real positive programme. We don't have to wait for somebody to be convicted. What we're trying to do is again, that's that another tier of early intervention, even lower than the one we've got.
Okay. Councillor Linley, number 13, moving on.
I think this one might be a little bit easier for you. Can we have details of any key future work, including business against abuse, please?
Yes, I've just touched on that. Obviously, the business against abuse, part of the violence against women and girls agenda, it's basically a collaboration with Drassax, South Yorkshire Police and Doncaster Council. We are the pilot for the county. One of the first national pilots, Cambridgeshire introduced it, Cleveland have already gone live. We are one of the next ones. Designed really to train businesses to identify and support women. Businesses themselves are a safe space, but what it allows them to do is identify people who are experiencing or at risk of violence and predatory behaviour or abuse. The initiative is growing, as I've alluded to. What we do from it is today's event is to train businesses to identify and respond to abuse, to create a safe space for vulnerable people, to reduce the violence against women and girls, and obviously to build stronger and safer communities. From its launch today, we'd be more than happy to send you a more detailed summary around what it is, what it aims to achieve, how it will be delivered, what training is being given, and then in due course we can provide an update on results and return. We've had a really overwhelming positivity from the business community, particularly the city centre, where the initial pilot will sort of focus on, and then we'll look how we can widen it to the wider communities in other townships and businesses. But again, I can send you a brief afterwards if that's okay around this and the youth future work. Is that okay?
Thank you. Just as a little bit of an addendum to that, I guess, really. If you're handing out all this information to us, is there something like an action pack for councillors giving what we can do to help and show what sort of support and backup we've got for those, reassurance, if you like, for those people, the constituents, businesses, who might be concerned about any retributions, because as you can imagine that we're going out trying to engage people to respond to crime and abuse, etc. But if they're asking us what can we do if this happens, we're going to need support to help them, if you like, to support them. So have you got anything that you can send on to us?
I think that kind of picks up on a point earlier about intelligence and people submitting intelligence to us and people's nervousness or not understanding the process that's followed. So we have done some work with other councillors by ward area before, so it's maybe something we can pick up through the ward member, the ward meetings, and make sure that the local neighbourhood policing inspector and the Thrive managers have that sort of briefing to in those environments, and leave you with some documentation that just supports that process, because it's a problem we've experienced with your predecessors as well. So yeah, absolutely.
That's great, thank you.
Right, Councillor Samet, please complete your speaking role.
Cheers, thank you, Chair. What actions have been taken to reduce knife crime, and how successful are they?
In terms of success, there was a 5% decrease in knife-related offending in 2025 compared to 24. And actually, when you look at the charts, the second half of 2025 from July onwards had the lowest recorded rates of knife crime in the past 4 years. So there has been some success locally. I think when we look at what we've talked about in the refreshed community safety strategy, there's quite a lot of detail in that space. But we've done a number of different, whether it's campaigning, education, prevention activities, so the knives and guns takes some of the stuff we've referenced in the presentation, and the work of the violence reduction subgroup in that slide, I think covers certainly the work that's been done so far. And as we look at the refresh strategy, which is about to go through its relevant governance process, and that will outline our plans moving forward around knife crime as well. So as a bit of a prelude to that, I guess. But looking at how we monitor the uptake of some of the programmes that we've got in schools will be key. Tracking the Youth Justice Service referrals and interventions for young people that are involved in knife crime. Again, we talked about the habitual knife crime carrier index, and that's a process that we use internally in our organisation to ensure that we understand who's carrying knives, the risk that sits around them, and our intervention to them. But looking at additional things such as the knife surrender campaigns that we've run before. There's frequently knife arch operations that run in the city centre in Frenchgate, for example. That will continue. Looking at how we improve the development and delivered parent and carer awareness sessions more. We'll also look at the profiling and the intelligence sharing that we have to make sure we understand where it happens and where it occurs and the reasons why. And part of that is we're looking to develop a shared dashboard that will show real-time violence data. One of the key bits, and we mentioned in the presentation about a public health approach to it, part of that is looking at data that's held in other agencies, such as health in particular. So where people are going to A&E, for example, with a knife or a stab injury, that actually, is there an opportunity there for us? Sometimes that's not reported to us. So actually, is there something to understand, not necessarily from an investigation point of view, because if they don't want to tell us, they don't want to tell us, but understanding the type of weapon that was involved, the location that was, the time of day it was, etc. And that allows us to think about additional prevention activity. So I suppose I'll refer you back to the slide deck for what we have done, and the new strategy will outline what we are going to do moving forward. But I think we've had quite an effective response around knife crime, and it always sits as one of those challenges that people talk about and are real worry about. And this again highlights that need for us to improve our communication to the public, because actually there's a really positive picture, I think, of late, certainly around knife crime, certainly what that we're aware of, seeing those really low rates, certainly to the second half of last year has been really positive.
So do you have any sort of talks with like local supermarkets and stuff like that about reporting people coming in off the street with possible knife injuries?
Not with supermarkets, we don't know. We certainly do with, from a health perspective and the health data that's available. But it's not something we've explored in terms of retailers, for example, where they've identified someone with a potential injury, reporting it to us. No, that's not something we have in place at the moment.
Last supplementary on this question, Councillor Yarn, please.
Thank you, Chair. You were mentioning habitual knife crime. I'm not exactly sure what that entails.
It's a matrix we use in relation to people who routinely carry knives. So we identify a cohort of what we call habitual knife carriers. And then we have a process in place that looks at intervention and support around those individuals. So when we become aware that we might, we come across them in whatever the environment is, and we're aware that they're carrying a knife, then we track them as a cohort of individuals to make sure they get the right help, the intervention bit or the enforcement bit of that element to support them.
Finished, okay. Over to Councillor Linley to round up the questions, please.
Yes, right, thanks. The report refers to some training, educational video, podcast and webcast training for tackling domestic and sexual abuse. Can these be distributed to the members, please? Yep.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, mate.
I did request one only, but off you go.
Yeah, you were also mentioning videos on e-bikes, educational videos on e-bikes that were aimed at youth and so on. Could we have those as well, please?
Yeah, any preventative educational videos that we produce or can happily share on any topic.
Thank you. One additional question from Gemma, please.
On this, I know it talks about some training to be passed on to members, but it talks about on the presentation about easy read guide produced to help professionals explain what domestic abuse is about. I do think it'd probably be a bit more than just a easy read guide. It will need to be more face-to-face training because coercive control, for example, isn't quite straightforward, which might be provided in the guide. So my question is are like particularly frontline council staff provided with training on what domestic abuse is, and that's all variations of domestic abuse, and again, same with the police as well?
Yeah, they are. The council has mandatory training around a range of different themes, domestic abuse being one of them. So yes, the council staff do receive information. In terms of other training, what we can do is perhaps again, I'll speak to Karen Shooter, who's the lead for domestic and sexual abuse, and just give you a more detailed breakdown of the materials available. If you feel you want any of them, then we can get them shared with you. There's no issues at all. Obviously, what this space is, and I think you can see from the slides, the domestic and sexual abuse slides are extensive. And what we are conscious of is that we only have 2 hours to give you what is very, very detailed subjects across the whole of safety, because safety is a catch-all. So we're only doing the tip of the iceberg through, in all fairness. So anything you want further information on, we are more than happy to provide as best we can, notwithstanding that some elements of these themes are very sensitive and covert. But yes, no problem. But yes, we do, and I think fair to say the police do extensively as well.
We do, and we have something called domestic abuse matters training for all our staff. That's just been reviewed at the moment to make sure it remains current. And locally, we're working on some initiatives with the Phoenix Project, for example, in terms of trying to understand and set up sort of victim groups to make sure that we get that feedback directly from victims to understand where we haven't been as good as we could have been, and making sure that we continue to make sure that our staff understand the nuances. Like coercive control has been a particularly interesting conversation that we've had, isn't it, at the Phoenix Project. So we are fully committed to that, and I hope that group is set up imminently as part of our wider improvement plans that sit around DA, which I separately can show you and talk you through if you wish.
Chair, just final comment. Just for councillors' awareness, the domestic abuse strategy is currently under review. So it's being rewritten for this year. It's alongside the community safety strategy standalone. That and sexual abuse have standalones. So that consultation has been undertaken. That is in draft, and it'll go through its executive process in the next couple of months. So I am aware that's being done. Yeah, well, it'll come through council. Yeah.
Follow up, Glenn. Final one, please.
We have.
Are you okay with that,
we see these posters out about, reporting this sort of stuff, which are like sort of, if you're suffering from, you can phone this number. That's like sort of reactive. Do we have any that's proactive, like signs in pubs saying to men, you do this and you will get this? Sort of warn them off first, rather than dealing with what's already happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we ran a campaign last year, which is still sort of around, which initially focused on sort of trying to speak to victims, but then afterwards talked in the theory of upstander, not bystander, which is trying to encourage other people to step into that space and act, and talk directly to the people who might perpetrate offending as well. So it is something we've done before, certainly through SYP. Whether we've done something through the SSDP and the Safer Community Space, that's something we maybe need to think about. But there is things like there is a lot of stuff for victims already in the nighttime economy. Ask for Angela is a prime example. The Businesses Against Abuse stuff will cover a lot of that as well. But we have ran some campaigns before that is not just targeted as victims, it looks at the other side as well.
Is there out like this in schools? Yeah.
Yeah, part of the work that the EPIC team have actually been doing is around driving the Vogue agenda. So there is material being developed for young people around behaviours, what's acceptable, your upskirting, your healthy relationships, etc. So this is I suppose an expanding arena that's being recognised, and again part of the new national strategy around violence against women and girls is addressing some of those early prevention messages. So that's the reason why we're about to do a workshop with the key partners that are involved in this piece of work to look at where do we start around violence against women and girls, where are we now, how will we address what the new strategy is and the 3 pillars of it is trying to do, and then how do we reset our prevention, intervention, engagement, enforcement and media and comms around that.
Yeah, because I think some of this will come from the parents.
Absolutely.
The kids will hear the parents
talking
in certain ways about women, and they'll just think that's what happens.
Yeah,
and they'll be the same.
There's a lot to consider around the communication aspects, and these are, I suppose, going back to the bit we talked about to do with substance misuse. Prevention is a key component of everything we do because we don't want for the problem to happen or somebody to be harmed. So we have got to drive that prevention agenda in absolutely everything. And of course, that is about looking at how young people from those formative years, what are they exposed to? How do you identify the harm in the family? How do we get those messages out through schools? How do we get it out in terms of in the community and that citizenship? We've got to look at this in as a whole system. And obviously the government have put some strong messages into that new strategy and the pillars they want us to focus on. And obviously that's why we feel we should review, refresh and reset based on, to grip it locally and then address those key pieces of work. So again, it's one that we'll come back to you with further details, because what we've tried to do is, as part of the work of the new strategy, we're not waiting for the new strategy to understand where we're at with the different themes of work. Pete and I systematically with Rachel have been working for the last 9 months on every single theme. And stand still, what we got nationally, regionally, locally, where were we at in those 3 tiers? Are we on the money? Are we a bit off-piste? Have we got the right resources? Have we got the right action? Have we got the right comms? Are we progressively seeing statistical changes? Is that the same as the perception? Is it the same as the impact and the feedback from the public? We are trying to do that across all themes so that we're not complacent. We can say we're nationally, decreasing, but if that's not what people feel, you can't just rely on stats, can you, to know if you're making a difference?
No, we just have to get the message out that this is totally unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Big style. Tell them. And tell them what will happen.
And be under no illusion, to get that message out, there are some challenges in terms of different communities. So this is a complex area of work. We will need your support. I know Councillor Coby, as an example, has been heavily linked to this. I know Councillor Larron has been linked to it, some of the work I've done with both of them over a number of different roles I've had. But yeah, I think this is one we'd probably want to give more information on as we sit and understand the new strategy, what our local offer looks like, what our key activity looks like. And I thank you for your sort of commitment and enthusiasm to get involved, but I think we need to bring it back to the table, if I'm brutally honest, to give you more information.
It's not going to be easy having to change hundreds of years of men's psychology.
Yeah, and whilst we recognise that there's some work to do with men, there's also work to do with women, with victims and with perpetrators, and that bystander role. So it is a whole system approach. I know I've used that several times, but we can't, there's no single agency, there's no single person that can fix some of this. This is a societal change, and there's got to be a monumental shift. We need to understand what our starting point is for Doncaster, and then how we take that forward. And I have to say, Karen Shooter has led and done a tremendous amount of work as an individual to drive this, so we need to recognise her efforts. She's the lead for domestic and sexual abuse. She has been the lead for Vogue. Vogue will be moving to Rachel and myself as a council, and Pete's team and his command team are also going to support that. We're going to drive that through the violence reduction theme group, but it'll be a golden thread across the theme groups. So yeah, big piece of work.
I have requests for one last question. I will then draw stumps on all questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm basically trying to understand if there's a working relationship between the council and police when it comes to these shops that are either fronts for money laundering, they're selling illegal cigarettes, drugs, you name it. Because there's a whole swarm of issues around those stores, from criminality to gatherings that generate certain behaviors and threatening behaviors from those groups that tend to congregate there, from having spotters that work for them in the area, again, generating a certain image for that area, which again our constituents are not liking at all. And then there's also the repetitive behavior, because once they're being actioned, let's say there's an inspection, illegal cigarettes are found, there's a fine applied, and then they just get on with life and they carry on doing the exact same thing again and again and again. So I'm trying to understand what the dynamics are, what the relationship is between council and police, and if there's anything we can do to help you guys in this.
I think we have a really positive relationship. I think you look at some of the operations that we've run jointly, particularly with trading standards, in the previous months has been successful. Come to College Road at the minute, there is a basement that is full of illicit cigarettes, and we're taking months to actually dispose of them through incineration. So I think we've been pretty proactive in that space. But from a partnership point of view, I've got absolutely no concerns whatsoever in terms of how the council support us in that space at all. There's always more every agency could do, but it's that balance of resource to everything else and the threat, arm and risk that we manage. So, but no, I think we work very well together. Off the top of my head, not immediately. I think just continue that encouragement of people to report things to us. The intelligence is crucial to everything that both my world and Jackie's world entails. So the more we can do to support people feeling confident to report to us, the better. But that is the key to it at the moment. People need to tell us.
Thank you. I will add that I have nothing but appreciation for the police in this sense. I know your jobs are difficult as they are. So all of these things, I don't want them to sound as critical. I'd rather to have them as constructive and to see where the flaws are, where the minuses are, and turn them into advantages, I suppose. So yeah, thank you for that.
One apology, I didn't see my enthusiastic deputy waving her hand, so this will be the last question. Thank you.
Apologies, it's my fault for being on leave for a bit and just coming back. Just a quick question on the departure lounge, going back to that conversation. I understand from the grapevine that it hadn't been working well recently as it had been for recent years. I just want to know where we are with it. Are we partners still working? Because I understand there's been a few reoffenders coming back into reoffending, so I just want to know a bit up to date what partners are working at Departure Lounge and how's that going?
Interestingly, I was having a conversation about the Departure Lounge yesterday. The Departure Lounge is specific for Marshgate. Obviously, it's NACRO-led as the lead organisation. I'm not aware of any issues around the partnership. I had a conversation with Starting Point and asked them to look at those individuals that we are engaging on the street to understand whether there is a knock-on from the Departure Lounge. In other words, we are seeing people rough sleeping or homeless that have exited the prison establishments. And of course, we are quite unique because we have 4 prisons. And the Departure Lounge is specific for Marshgate. What we do have, and again, I was talking to Simca about it yesterday, is that we have a new commissioned community hub. Forgive me, the name of the organisation escapes me. It is in my notes, so I could tell you in a minute when I look at them. But I wanted to understand their offer and how they support people exiting the prison environment to prevent them ending up on the streets of Doncaster, because we are quite unique. We have a lot of the North East and West Yorkshire prisoners in our prisons, and obviously we've got the different categories of prisons as well as the youth offending open site at Hatfield. So in answer to your question, I'm not aware of anything, so if you want to share any further details, I'm actually looking at this, and I sit on the Prison Partnership Board, so it's something I can then talk to the governors about and the probation service who sit with me in that forum. So if you've got any concerns, if you give me some more details, I'll happily come back to you if that answers it. But as I say, because of, as you know, I have a dual responsibility. I have oversight of the city centre alongside community safety as part of the Thrive work. So the city centre is obviously a cause for concern, because that's where our transport hubs are for the 4 prisons, for people to get back to where they need to be when they exit prison. So it's one we need to keep an eye on in terms of, is there any impact on rough sleeper or homelessness numbers? Are they the channels of support and that prison pathway, is it working? And if not, why not? And then what do we do? So if that answers your point, it's an area I'm just currently looking at.
Okay, now the discussions have finally finished. I would like to move just to the recommendations. You should have all seen these in paragraph 9, page 12 of the report. Does the panel agree that we have reviewed the information provided today and that members to note and comment on the content of the report? One proposer, please. One seconder, please.
Chair, I'm happy to second as well. But I was going to say, it might be worth adding to apart from something that Pete Fott mentioned earlier about the off-road bikes, regarding as a recommendation to write to see if we can improve the legislation in regards to about being able to go into access to properties where they have got enough evidence to say that off-road bikes are in that property to be confiscated.
So how far do we take that now, or can that be done subsequently? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so that's accepted, but we just need somebody to second. Okay. So, I make no apologies for the time taken. I think every minute has been beneficial. Yeah, it's fine, yeah. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance, and we'll round off with one final bit, which will only take a couple of minutes. Our governance officer, Rachel Wright, will just go through the OSMC work plan.
Good morning. The work plan is attached to the agenda today for members' information. As you can see, we're now approaching the end of the year, and therefore members will start to develop a work plan for next year in the coming weeks. If you've got any areas that you'd like to be put up for consideration, please forward them to the chair or Chris Rothwell or Caroline Martin. Thank you.
Chair, just a final point from our perspective. Obviously, we're conscious that there's a lot of new members as part of the panel. This is the first time we've presented this information to you, but what we are keen to do is constantly improve. So from what we've presented and the content, if there is any feedback, you'd like it done in a different way, in a different format, further detail, less detail, we're just trying to cater for what the panel wants from us. So that's, at this point, we just thought that might be useful to just mention to you. If there is any feedback, we'd welcome it.
Very valid point, and I'd just like to highlight, especially, as you said, few new people, the old phrase, we don't know what we don't know. Anything you think we need to know, overburden rather than underburden, and just send it to the collective group. Yes, all right with that, everybody?
Just an idea, would it be possible to maybe have this meeting in 2, so we can go more into depth on certain items?
Can I make a suggestion, Chair? We used to do that previously. We used to have it in October, like as a halfway point before this meeting. We used to deep dive on subjects. So I make that suggestion. It used to work, so it helped time.